When a series of missionary photographs arrived in England in the late 19th century, they caused outrage. The mutilations had been strategically photographed against white for maximum impact. The children came from the Congo, but the man accused of their suffering was white, European, and royal. For almost 100 years, evidence has lain dormant of one of the greatest mass murders. Millions of Africans died in one man's quest for wealth and glory. Until Adolf Hitler arrived on the scene, the European standard for cruelty was set by a king. Leopold II, King of the Belgians, was the personal owner of 1 million square miles of Central Africa and king sovereign of 20 million Africans. In the 1880s and 90s, the world outside Africa wanted rubber for its new bicycle and car industries, and Leopold's Congo Free State had the world's largest supply of wild rubber. The king had struck gold, black gold. He was determined to get as much rubber to Europe as he could, and as fast as he could.
The rubber in this district has cost hundreds of lives, and the scenes I have witnessed while unable to help the oppressed have been almost enough to make me wish that I were dead.
Over a period of 20 years, Leopold turned the Congo into a vast labor camp 80 times the size of Belgium, in the process making himself into one of the richest men in the world. As the number of deaths grew, so did his profits.
This rubber traffic is steeped in blood. And were the natives to rise and sweep every white person on the upper Congo into eternity, there would still be left a fearful balance to their credit.
But the longer the king stayed in the Congo, the greater the evidence against him. Missionaries, travelers, and the victims all added to the clamor for the king to be stopped.
After 3 days, we returned to the village. We saw dead bodies, and we saw, hanging on a line, fixed between 2 sticks, tied up genital organs. Witaka, testimony 1904.
Astonishingly, for the time, there were calls for Leopold to be hanged at the new International Court of Justice in The Hague.
If there were such thing as criminal prosecutions in international affairs, then assuredly a true bill would be found against the sovereign, who obtained not a paltry sum of money, but a whole empire by false pretenses.
Instead of being hanged, Leopold was reinvented as a great humanitarian king, a great civilizer. The Congolese historian Elikia Ambokolo believes that the truth about Leopold's crimes was deliberately hidden to protect Belgium and Belgian interests in the Congo. This film details the charges against King Leopold and reveals a cover-up of monumental proportions. The signs of the wealth that Leopold amassed are everywhere in Brussels, and on an enormous scale. The king built the cinquantenaire to celebrate the country's 50th anniversary. It's become part of the national identity.
The cinquantenaire is a very expressive symbol of Belgium and of the proud Belgium. In fact, King Leopold paid for it with his own money, but he didn't say so openly, because this would prove that, first of all, he had a lot of money. People would ask questions where it came from, and then he would have to admit that it came from the Congo. So the cinquantenaire symbolizes this lie about Belgium and about the royal implication in politics, about the colonial exploitation.
It's incredible to see all this finery, all these buildings, all this richness without a single reference to the Congo or the Congolese. Leopold could do this thanks to the wealth of the Congo, the blood and suffering of the Congolese, and the exploitation of the Congo. It's incredible, this effacement of the Congo.
The Royal Museum for Central Africa was also built by Leopold and paid for with Congo money. It's a vision of Africa through Leopold's eyes and with a huge dose of homage. Homage to Leopold, who gave the Belgians a colony, and homage to the pioneers who died carrying out the king's wishes. White conquest is mythologized as benevolence, as bringing civilization to the Congo.
This place gives me a strange feeling, a mixture of disgust, surprise, and disbelief. Everywhere, the same message comes across. The Belgians have only done good things in the Congo, very good things. This message was meant for internal use, but also for the wider world. Its meaning is, recognize Leopold's civilizing work in the Congo. Recognize the legitimacy of the Belgian presence in the Congo. I am accused of having killed a native tied to a tree, and of having led an attack against a village during which many blacks have been killed. I'm accused, along with 5 other whites, of having killed 500 people, and of stringing up women and children in the form of a cross, and of having cut off men's genitals and heads to be put on display on the fence. Louis Lacroix.
There is no doubt that a lot of things happened in Congo Free State under King Leopold II that are clearly unacceptable, that are even scandalous. But one has to look at the sign of the times, and the sort of none of the colonial powers in those days were really softies and had a fairly human approach. I mean, only look at what the Brits and the French and the Dutch who introduced slave trade, or the Germans were doing. So it's not a period of which we can be very proud, but one has to look at it in a particular perspective of time and of history.
Leopold's Congo was a prison state. Africans had no rights, no justice, and no freedom. They were there to serve a voracious European king. Thousands of miles away, Leopold was content that the end always justified the means, and the end was to make money. A large slice of the Congo profit was earmarked for Ostend. Leopold set about turning a seaside village into a rival to Queen Victoria's Brighton. Ostend was going to be his most expensive architectural project. He built Venetian galleries to shelter the rich from the cold North Sea, a palace for himself, a casino, a golf course, and a racetrack. Leopold never completed his grand scheme, but a grateful people honored him with a giant statue.
Here we are standing in front of a monument. It only dates back to 1931. That means 22 years after the king's death. It forces us to look up at the king from a frog's perspective. It's a romantic representation of the so-called great national past.
And that romantic vision of Belgium's past has to be carefully protected.
Sometimes it's hard for me to know how the people I'm talking to feel about the king, but I have to admit that if I suspect serious royalists or people who don't want to hear a bad word about Leopold are present, I am very careful. Dirk Brien's White Tour Guide.
Once Leopold dominated Kinshasa too, but in the last years of his reign the Congo was handed over to the Belgian state, which gratefully held control in his name for half a century.
And so, in the heart of Black Africa, Belgium is realizing the dream of a great king.
The king no longer has pride of place. The Congo is independent. Leopoldville is now Kinshasa, and Leopold is in a junkyard.
For me, it was Leopold II in person, not his statue, but he himself, so big and so tall, he seemed to crush me, to dominate me. It was out of the question to pass in front of the horse. You had to go behind. It was as if I was forced to breathe in the odor of the excrement of Leopold's horse. After independence, it was still there. It was a real provocation. Then, finally, the day arrived when I saw I was there. The young people pull Leopold down. A revenge. What a joy to finally see this scandal lying on the ground where it belonged.
But it takes more than destroying symbols to wipe out generations of foreign occupation.
Look at his clothes, buttons here and here. A soldier, do you think? Who is he? It's Leopold II, King Leopold II. What did he do? He was a big boss, the Belgian who colonized us. So we have a link with him? He's our uncle. He colonized us. He taught us about civilization.
Leopold once wrote, "A people which is content with its homeland and which dreads even the shadow of a conflict lacks the characteristics of a superior race."
A Belgian officer had been dispatched with a force of some 50 or 60 men to capture a chief. In rummaging in the huts for plunder, they came upon two women, a mother and daughter, who had not had the time to get away. They were brought up before the officer, who demanded of them where the chief was in hiding. They either did not know or would not tell. He ordered them to be secured and laid out on the ground. And a stalwart soldier then proceeded to administer 50 strokes of the shakot to each. The flogging continued until each had received 200 lashes. Finally, this Belgian officer ordered his men to cut off the breasts of the women and left them to die where they lay.
Don't this shit make a nigga wanna? 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 Don't this shit make a nigga wanna?
Thoughts and prayers to all of the non-white people victims of white supremacy in the Florida area, path of Hurricane Milton. Hope you are safe, evacuated, dry, minimal property damage, if any, certainly no loss of life folks that you care about. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy. Gus T. Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information with non-white people, victims of white supremacy, on what white supremacy racism is and how it works. Today's date, Thursday, October 10, 2024. So I have been told, fourth installment, the biography Kings, Andrée Blouin's My Country, Africa. We are picking it up in my book on the bottom of page 100. We had the quarrels with Andrea and her mother. Her mother is disappointed that she won't be a teen concubine for white men. And they're brawling about this. She's losing weight. That's where we left off at the end of 100. The Astute Cows listeners, it won't just be, oh my God, Jesus, Gus, that's really poor taste, man. Did he? Ugh. The Astute Cows listeners, they man, this is the second time this year, Gus, we've heard this specific Diddy track. What's the deal? The same thing that I said when we heard this the last time. It will be clear as we proceed. Oh, Pat, it will be clearer as we proceed. Jim Jones. That's it. It do make you, want to act a fool or do something with what we heard. The audio that we heard before Diddy and Bussa. White King, Red Rubber, Black Death. 2003 BBC documentary. Stunning to see pictures, and I think it's so relevant, even though they started off some of this material in terms of the Belgian takeover in the Congo. Now, this does start in the late 1800s, and this continues into the time period that we're talking about. But I think that is so important. Even that quarrel with Andrea and her mom. Why won't you be a teen concubine for these white men? This is happening in an area where they killed 10 million black people in very short order. You heard that anecdote. This is recorded where this happened over and over and over and over. Hanging genitals, hanging chopped off heads, sounding like Jeffrey Dahmer. Putting bodies up in the shape of a cross. This is like infamous in the annals of white supremacy racism. I had totally forgotten Joseph Conrad's The Heart of Darkness. That's looked at as one of the most important books written by white people. That is all about white savagery in the Congo specifically. Chopping off genitals, chopping off the breasts of the females. Put them in pits and with the chakot. There it is. Everybody got a chakot in the Congo to do some lashing of niggers. Everybody, the chakot. How many times we heard that in the book? The chakot. They got so many niggers, you just got to have a chakot at the ready. You can't have a pistol. You got your chakot so you can do some lashing. Jesus. We also, now you heard in the segment Guido Griselis, hope I'm saying his name right, suspected racist. He was the one who said, well, it's a sign of the times, none of the colonial powers, the British and the Germans, none of them were softies now. We look at this in the time and history, all of that is racist excusing of white barbarism and terrorist behavior. All of that, and it's so standard. And as a historian, he knows this because plenty of white people of this time period, contemporaries, when all this was happening, oh my God, oh, this is savage. What are you doing? Jesus, you're killing them by the bushels. Oh, and wrote books about it. And all of this is the stuff of even black people also wrote about this during the time period. We'll get to all that later. Anyway, They talked about the tour guide, Dirk Brien, I think I'm saying his name right as well. He said that when loyalists, people who don't want to hear about Leopold hacking off breasts and genitals, and we don't want to hear that when we're on the beach tour. He didn't say white people, the great Belgian national power. I almost thought we were talking about make America great again. Is it MAGA people? They got the red hats and everything on the tour over there when they want to go in Brussels and see the horse and King Leopold and all of that. Anyway, we heard Professor Ilikia Mbolo, black male victim of white supremacy in the Congo, and he was talking about. They had the horse there, and he had to walk behind, and so he had to smell the excrement and everything. He spoke with a group of black people, Congolese, and he showed them a picture of King Leopold. He was the one who said, "Do you know who this is? He's got the buttons and all that." And it was a black guy who said, "Oh yeah, that's King Leopold, and you know he was the big boss, and he taught us everything about civilization." Wow. That's key. He didn't say he chopped off all the genitals and the penises, and he didn't say nothing about that. He said, "Oh yeah, he was the big boss. He was the one who colonized us. He was the one who taught us about civilization. That's our uncle." He didn't say nothing about chopping off genitals, chopping off penises, raping children. He didn't say nothing about that. Nothing about that. Matter of fact, remember, Andrea said that her mother, Josephine, black, didn't have a centime of education. A centima of education. Didn't know nothing. Illiterate, nothing. It sounds like not much has changed in the Congo. And this is, so you fast forward 100 years. Will definitely make you want to act a fool. The cognac, or the matter of fact, when I played this song the first time around with Jim Jones, I specifically played it partly because I said, there's something kind of hedonistic about all this. We're out on the islands and got nigger slaves and raping people and rum and all the rest. Like, what? It's kind of hedonistic, right? I've been to Jamaica. Man, pay attention. Katherine Massey Book Club, Context of White Supremacy, audio segment 1.
And lay it down. Come on, niggas frontin' with they thug image, but we pay them no mind. I drink until the bottle finish. Talk to me. What's up, son?
Although I wish it had not been so, one of my clients was Madame Dupuy, the wife of the director of the Department of Forests and Water. Their property was some distance from town, on a lonely and difficult road through luxuriant vegetation. Madame Dupuy was an enormous woman of about 60, a fanatic about her clothes and her appearance. She was always highly rouged, her eyebrows painted long and black, and her hair crimped, as for a ball. I went to her home and she asked me to make her a pajama of canary yellow and black silk. To this I applied my very best efforts. However, each time I brought the finished pajama to her, she changed her mind about the style and had me take it home to do over again. Flounces were replaced by pleats, her fancies for ties, frills, peplums, and swags replaced one another. 6 extra times I made that long trip to her house in the woods, in a heat and humidity that made my clothes and hair stick with perspiration to my skin. 6 times she mercilessly handed the pajama back to me to do over. Finally she was satisfied and asked me how much I wanted for my work. In the meek manner with which I had learned to deal with these high-handed and temperamental women, I answered, "It will be 5 francs, madam." Madame Dupuy exploded. 5 francs, she shrieked. "You're a thief. What are you thinking of?" She was red with rage. 5 francs. Why, I shall call the police. But madam, I replied in an even tone, I've worked on this pajama for a week. I tried to speak calmly, I had suffered too much for those 5 francs to lose them now. Every day I've walked a dozen kilometers, and every day you have made some extravagant new change. 5 francs, madam, is not unfair. It's what you owe me. I'll have you thrown in prison. This was too much. Undone, I shouted that she was a thief of my time, and a painted old witch to boot. She screamed for her boys to throw me out. I resisted, adding a few more of my thoughts on her appearance and practices. Then I broke away from her boys, and began running down the beaten dirt road toward town. Madame Dupuy unleashed an enormous wolf dog on me. I was terrified by its ferocious barking as it came after me. In my pell-mell flight I tripped, fell full length, hard, on my face. The dog was instantly upon me, tearing savagely at my dress. Fortunately, the boys of the house had run after the dog. They came to my aid and drove him off. My head was bleeding, my dress was in rags. I was crying so hard I could not get up for some minutes, in spite of the brotherly solicitude of the old ship's servants. On top of the rest of the difficulties in my life, this seemed unbearable. Here I was, trying to earn my living honestly, and what did I get for it? As I walked slowly home, weeping, I thought of my mother's reproaches. It was true that many of the young women I knew had found a much easier way to survive. As the housekeeper of an unmarried man, or the mistress of one who had his own family, these young women lived in comfort and relative security. Somehow the idea filled me with shame. Yet who, really, I had to ask myself, was the fool? Was it, in fact, possible for a young woman to be as proud as I, in a system designed to keep non-whites on their knees? Leopoldville, the capital of the Belgian Congo, was just across the Congo River from Brazzaville. One day, I went there for my work. On the street, I ran into an old friend from the orphanage, Jean. She was about to marry a man of mixed blood who was the captain of one of the river boats. Jean was disturbed at seeing me so discouraged and thin. "You can't go on like this, Andrée," she said solicitously. "You're exhausted, you need a rest. Why don't you come and spend a month with us on the boat? It will do you a lot of good." Gratefully I accepted. I was longing to get away from Brazzaville and the many humiliations I had experienced in the past year there. Although I had written my father our address when we were settled, I had never heard from him. But then I hardly hoped that he would begin to write now. If I were to survive, I was going to have to somehow recover my energy and desire to work. The boat on which we sailed a few days later was called the Belongo. It was a single-decker with first and second-class cabins for Europeans. As the guest of the captain and Jean, I was given a little cabin on the bridge, although according to law, only whites were normally permitted to have cabins. But I spent almost no time there. I wanted to immerse myself in the life of the river. The contact with the great outdoors would be the remedy that would cure me. We sailed up the Congo River, entering its tributary, the Coup. The countryside had a primitive beauty. Papyrus bordering the bank stretched to infinity ahead of us, the reeds swaying gently in the sun. I spent hours on the boat's deck watching these lush shores as they passed. After 4 days on this cruise, I was drunk with the beauty of my land. Life on board was uneventful and my friends left me free to dream. Just because I had suffered in the orphanage was no reason, I believed, not to compare well, in my appearance, with other women. I never believed that to be unclean or unkempt was a sign of virtue or humility, even if it is said that dirt is the water of the poor. I had the reputation of being coquettish, even proud. But that was not so, it was that I had consideration for my own person. Even when I was wearing clothes that were patched, I always arranged them to look their best. Our dresses were short then, just to the knee. I was very slim, and still had a small bosom at that time. My hair, which had grown out, was brown and silky, worn behind the ears. The guéché, or side curl, did not come in until later. Often I wore a flower, like a rose, in my hair. It was an easy way to feel fresh and pretty. I wore a bright lipstick, red as poinsettias, called rouge baiser. We did not make up our eyes then, for our youth was enough. It was one evening after dinner, on the deck of the Bolongo, that I began to talk with Roger C.O.W.S. As usual, I was leaning against the rail, watching the darkened shores and the little fires of occasional passing villages. He came to my side and we became acquainted. I had seen him in the dining room where I ate with the Europeans around a big table. There were 15 of us passengers in all. Roger was tall and well-built, his strong face bronzed by the African sun. I found him handsome. Like the other men then, he was simply dressed in a short-sleeved white shirt, open at the neck, and light trousers. I had felt his eyes on me since the trip began. Deliberately I had ignored his insistent looks. Men often stared at me with insolence and desire. I had learned to keep my distance by adopting a manner that was haughty and cold toward them. Now, however, my mood changed. I felt that I was living, at last. Everything delighted me, the savannas, the villages, the flat or rugged countryside, and even the way this man looked at me. I laughed. I was charming. Why not? The woman who cannot indulge her desire to feel pleasing does not feel herself fully alive. We spent the evening together, and the next day. Everything that we looked at seemed as new as if it had been created expressly for our pleasure. Roger's presence brought me a turmoil that I had never before experienced. Everything I saw, heard, and felt was intensified for me. Never had I felt life more keenly. In the evening, in my cabin, I found mysterious tears rolling down my cheeks. I could not understand the strange sensations that were taking possession of me. This not uncommon experience, for which every woman waits with hope and joy, was for me unfathomable. Perhaps I was happy, I thought. I was troubled, tormented, finally obsessed. Roger, I learned in the long hours we spent together, for now we were inseparable, was of aristocratic birth, related to the Belgian royal family. He had been appointed the new director of the fabulous Belgian Kasai Company, which had vast holdings of every kind in the Congo. He was on his way to Bainingville to take over this post for the first time. Perhaps if I had not been so exalted by the beauty of the nature around me and so free of all care on this island of ease, this smoothly churning boat, I could have better mastered my new feelings. Perhaps I could have tempered my passions with common-sense warnings on the realities of my life. But I was of an ardent nature and could do nothing by halves. I abandoned myself in the arms of my first love, this handsome, bronze prince of the race that had so often hurt me. What was happening to us, we told ourselves, was extraordinary. What we felt was different from anything that ever existed before on earth. The marvelous days succeeded one another. Together we looked at the white sand banks where the crocodiles slept in the sun. Before us were the fishermen's huts, at the foot of which were lined up their canoes. The air rang with bird calls and the cries of naked children who ran along the river's edge. Everyone greeted our passage with lifted hands and smiles. In Africa all is charming, the hospitality, the ever-spontaneous kindness. While the boat continued on its way, down in the hull, the black passengers made shift as best they could. They had no protection against either sun or rain except by erecting little shelters from the mats they had brought. I watched them as they crouched there during the hot days, or huddled against one another for warmth when it rained. But there were even greater hardships during their passage. Occasionally the boat had to stop to take on the firewood that was its fuel, and then the men were called on to help carry this wood aboard. Naked to the waist, with a burlap sack to protect their shoulders, they tramped, bent under the heavy loads, up the gang plank. The boat stopped by night as well as by day. One night when these laborers had gone to fetch wood in the forest, a terrible cry rent the air. We ran out of our cabins. A man had been bitten by a serpent. When they carried him back onto the boat, he was already comatose. In spite of Roger's efforts to comfort me, I could not sleep any more that night. I was almost ashamed of my cabin, of my privileged existence, while my black brothers were outside, exposed to the dangers of the jungle. The Bolongo put off immediately, but it was many hours before we reached a post where the poor man could be cared for. By then he was dying, there was no more hope for him. I was shocked by this event. In spite of my happiness with Roger, I was depressed by it. I might even say that it marked me. Roger and I made plans, quite simply, to live together. I was young, I was in love, I was eager to live. 10 days later we arrived, in the evening, at Bainingville. There I received my first intimations of what life held for the mistress of mixed blood. Since the night before Roger had seemed troubled. A certain sadness invaded us. An hour before we were to reach Bainingville, Roger said, "I must talk with you." I dreaded what he would say. But I had to hear how he would explain this unnamed malaise that had settled between us. "We'll soon be docking," he said. "A committee of welcome will be there to meet me." The company officials. Already I understood what he meant. At the last little village where we stopped, he said, and his tones were meant to reassure me, I sent a telegram to Dima. The company's seat is at Dima, about 60 kilometers inland, beyond Bainingville. I told them I needed not one but 2 cars. "The second car is for you, my dear." I felt as though I were sinking. Wrecked. Lost. "Are you ashamed of me, Roger?" I asked in a low, miserable voice. "Come now," he chided me gently. "What is this way of looking at things? For a couple of hours I must be with the company officials. Then I'll be with you again, in our new home. I'm an embarrassment to you," I accused him. "You're ashamed to be seen with me. If I were ashamed of you I wouldn't have asked you to live with me. To share my life at Dima." It was true that this had been his idea. It was he who proposed that I leave the boat to stay with him. The initiatives in making plans for our future had been taken by him. Although I, an ardent woman, shared fully in creating our romance. "If my presence is damaging to your position in the company, then I don't want to be there, Roger," I said disconsolately. "I'll go on. I'll continue my voyage alone, as I had planned." For a moment I thought I was capable of sacrificing myself for my love's well-being. "There's no question of that," he said firmly. "I want you with me. Don't you understand? I just don't want to confront them, arriving at my new post. In the first moments. Just this first meeting." When the boat drew near the wharf at Bainingville we could see several businessmen, obviously from the Kasai company, waiting to welcome their new director. Roger turned to me and said in a discreet manner, "Will you go down and wait for me in the cabin? I'll come down to say goodbye." I understood that it was more convenient for him to say goodbye to me out of sight than on the bridge. So I waited for him obediently in the cabin. But when he came, I cried. I was wounded, frightened. Unable to voice my real fears, I clung to him. "I hate to be separated from you for this long trip through the jungle. And worse yet, at night. I'm afraid, Roger." "Don't be afraid. I'll ask that our car not go too fast, so that you can follow closely." As Roger went down the gangplank he looked back at me and he continued to look back as long as he could, as if to say, "I'm not abandoning you. I'll see you in a little while. Please. I beg you." In the cabin I cried a lot. I told myself that I didn't want to give Roger problems. I would prefer to continue on alone. But this, in fact, was impossible. I was so truly in love with this man that I couldn't turn away. I could not stop my heart and go on with this trip. I thought, I'll try my luck. I'll follow this man, now that we've begun. Soon afterward I left, in the second car, which Roger had arranged for me. In spite of myself, I was repeating my mother's humiliating history. Thus a new life began for me. No longer the innocent, proud young girl I had been, I was now to learn, through love, the degrading existence of the African concubine. Chapter 6. Africa unfolds, my life takes a turn. The road to Dima was frightening. It was little more than a trail of 2 tracks, full of potholes, frequently dipping into small streams through which the chauffeur had to drive carefully, to keep the motor turning. All around us was the exuberant foliage of the jungle. It was now full night, totally black. The headlights of the car burrowed through the menacing, dense trees and vines as through a living tunnel. My usual curiosity and enthusiasm for the adventures that my Africa had to offer did not respond to the scene. I found no charm in it. I felt as though I were plunging into a trap. It was a trap of my own choice, of course, for although I had not sought it, I had agreed to it. I was to share the life of a man whom I had met less than 2 weeks earlier. And already, this car was proof of it, I was relegated to a second-class position. I was so young, so inexperienced. I had no idea how I should live. But the bad had already been done. There was nothing I could do but continue, recklessly, in pain and despair. It was about 11 o'clock at night when we reached the town of Dima and found the section for residences of the Kasai Company officials. There, Roger had posted a sentinel who was waiting with a flashlight to show us the way to Roger's house. When we arrived, Roger was on the front lawn, watching for me. He hurried to the car, opened the door, and took me in his arms. Then he pointed to the 1-story house above, set among the big trees. "Here is your new home," he said. "Do you think you'll like it?" A marvelous house, it seemed extraordinary to me. And I was consoled by the welcome Roger gave me. But I was still thinking, what is waiting for me in this place where I must be careful not to meet anyone? How am I going to live my life, as a woman? Immediately Roger took me on a tour of the house, which the company had remodeled and repainted to make it fresh and modern for the new director. It was in the choicest position of all the fine Kasai Company residences, set high on a bluff, overlooking the Kasai River flowing not far in the distance. Before us, the bluff dropped down to the wharf where the boats landed. The house was spacious, with great bay windows. A large covered terrace almost surrounded the house, to protect the rooms from the heat of the sun. "Tell me if there are some things you want changed," Roger said, "and I'll have them made." He took a piece of paper to make notes of what I would say. He wanted to satisfy my every desire. So together we walked through the rooms. The floor was of cement, for coolness, with rugs to make it livable, and the furniture was that of a traditional bourgeois European home, all imported from Belgium. There was electricity, but it was not available after 9 o'clock or 9:30, so the lights were supplemented by lampions à pression everywhere. I, with my caprices, had a few little ideas of my own about changes I wanted to make. I laughed and told Roger that I wanted to remodel the form of the opening between the living room and the dining room. Somewhere I had seen this opening rounded, in an arch, which I found sumptuous, marvelous. I absolutely had to have this arch for us, in our new home. Bon. "It will be done," he promised. After noting a few other little things that I thought I wanted, Roger presented his trusted manservant, Jean, to me. There was also a cook and a boy. From then on, I was to be in the middle, between Roger and the servants. "You must be the mistress of the house, now," he said. I knew nothing about this, at 17, with the background I'd had. I simply had to throw myself into it. In the succeeding days I was better able to appreciate Roger's splendid home. Dima was a company town, built on the edge of the river for the Europeans. The view was pleasant, and the air and climate were the best in the region. The African workers were less favored, some distance away, amidst the swamps and mosquitoes. The Kasai Company of Belgium, like the Interfina of France, was an enormous enterprise that imported and exported whatever was profitable in Africa. It owned boats, mines, towns, and landing facilities. It had planted thousands of hectares of palmetto trees, which were cultivated for their nuts. At Dima, where the African headquarters were ensconced, every effort had been made to provide a handsome life for the whites who were committed to the company's success. The European quarter was magnificent with its fine lawns and nothing like the African quarter, where there was no question of sucking sassaflowers. We had an immense garden with ferns and dahlias. All around the house were flower beds, beautifully kept by our gardener. We also had a vegetable garden, with lettuce, radishes, and cabbages. The company personnel soon became aware of my presence. Now that I understood Roger's position, I wanted to be discreet and not be seen with him. But Roger said, "No, let's take a stroll." And often he took me in long walks among the company residences. Holding my hand, he very deliberately walked me up and down the avenues and grandes allees. Of course the Belgians were at their windows and on their terraces, wild with indignation. Every Friday a boat came in with all the special provisions that the company personnel imported for their pleasure. Roger said to me, "Before the boat arrives, a list of the supplies is sent ahead. Jean will give it to you, so you can see what is available. You decide what you want. Then I want you to go to get the things for us." This was his way of imposing my presence on the community. So, on that first Friday morning, there I was, among all those good, stout Belgian matrons, I who at 17 weighed no more than a feather. Already I had seen the lists of hams, liquors, bottled water, perfume, and so on, and decided what I wished to order. It was given to me to go first, before all of them. The other women had to wait while I made my selections. "It's for Monsieur C.O.W.S, I said firmly. "Oui, madame." "What does madame wish?" And so I chose, liberally, everything I wanted, as became my position. One thing in particular that I remember I bought was a pair of silk slacks, which I had to make over, because I was so thin. I wore them when Roger and I went on our walks together. Sometimes I wore the shorts that I had made very brief. Right away Roger bought me a sewing machine with a hand crank and its own carrying case. How proud I was. I had never had such a valuable present before. I could go into the stores and buy any fabrics I wanted. Roger spoiled me in this way. He adored watching me as I sewed. There was a big mirror before which I worked. I would get up to try the dresses on, over and over, to make them fit perfectly. This interested him enormously. He loved to see this orphan evolving in her life, growing into her new role. Occasionally I would go into the kitchen and make something for us to eat. It seemed so romantic for him to have a dish made with my own hands. I did the best I could to make our life pleasant. Our evenings were merry and companionable. Within the silly limits of our prescribed positions we were happy. However, when the wives of other officials in the company were entertaining, the handsome bachelor director was bound to appear alone, and inevitably he was paired off with someone's daughter, sister, niece, or guest. Roger said he hated this and on several occasions even rebelled and made a scene. But underneath both he and I understood that this was the reality of our Africa and we had to accept it with a certain resignation. It was already a very big thing that he, in his position, was living with me, although I never really adjusted to the second-class position that I occupied in Roger's life. I tried to be cheerful during the time we were together. It was ironic that after years of longing for freedom at the orphanage I found myself a prisoner again in this fine house with its elegant rooms and servants. Furtiveness and dissemblance were not a part of my nature. I was of a sociable temperament, frank, curious, and vivacious. This sequestered life, cut off from the society of both whites and blacks, was not to my taste at all. Still, it was my option entirely, for I could have returned to my mother on the plain at Poto at any time. Since I could not receive with Roger, he did not invite people to the house. He did not want to hurt me, so we kept to ourselves and made our lives together, alone. The style in which we passed our days was not only extremely comfortable, it also included the most elegant customs of European society. When it was time for us to dine, Jean, Roger's trusted manservant, would change into an all-white outfit. His trousers, jacket, and shirt were impeccable, just out of the laundry, crackling fresh. And when he served us our aperitifs, or waited on us at the table, he wore white gloves. I had seen how some European women lived, the women I sewed for in Brazzaville, and others, at Bangui. But to me, to be served in a livery of white, with white gloves, was the summit. I would say that our little life was more bourgeois than ardent. It was an outlet for our love life. For me, it was an apprenticeship in living, and for Roger it was convenient, a practical love affair. It was not meant to last a long time, that is sure. Roger had not been long at his new post when it was decided that, to acquaint him with the company's holdings in the Congo, he should take a trip of several weeks through the Kasai and Kouélu districts. He wanted me to be with him on this trip. I was eager to see more of my great continent, and our travels were to be, for me, another phase in my awakening to the injustices done to the black people in their own land. I was also glad of the chance to get away from Dima, where I found the restrictions of my relationship with Roger galling. The Kasai Company had a lucrative relationship with the African people. For minimal sums it bought their raw products and services, and then it recovered even those small sums by selling the people articles for which they had acquired a taste while working for the white man. This is commonly known as the civilizing process, and is particularly successful when associated with a culture that teaches shame for the people's original tastes. Disseminating at the same time religious dictums about poverty and humility does not distract from this useful principle. Thus the African laborer learned to work hard all month to pay for the sugar, matches, cloth, beer, wine, and tobacco that he would not have wanted if he were not working for the white man. As for the Kasai Company, pillaging the copper, gold, tin, and forest resources of the continent not only cost them next to nothing in labor, but what little it did cost them they got back in profit on what they sold to that labor. Wherever there was a gathering of even 100 or 200 people, there was money to be made, and the company's agents went deep into the brush to find such opportunities. I was not to understand the odious system until much later. At the moment of our departure I could think only of the adventure ahead. At last I was to see some of the lands of which I had dreamed when, at the orphanage, I listened in awe to a new girl with a mysterious new tongue. Our travels took us from Dima to Kikui, across the Kouélu region, by car. It was a well-organized trip, planned so that each night we would stop either in a town where the Kasai Company had quarters, or at a camp in the brush that was maintained for the purpose of white travelers. Roger and I drove, with our chauffeur, in a Land Rover, which was extremely comfortable. The truck with the cook and his helper and an interpreter who spoke all the necessary languages went ahead, with our provisions and camping equipment. When we arrived at our destination, everything would be prepared. Our beds would be set up with their mosquito netting and the evening meal would be ready for us. Sometimes, when there was a group of villages in one area to visit, as at Buabu, we would make one place our base for a week and Roger would go off each day to see the plantations and company stores, returning in the late afternoon. Often these stores were totally insignificant, but it was still necessary for the new general director to know of them, and to visit them once a year, so the company could decide whether the activity of the region should be expanded or reduced. Driving on the rutted, clay roads of Africa's interior was hard. We also had to cross, on long rafts, immense rivers, swollen with rains, where the currents were dangerous and strong. But we had the luxury of good foods. We even had a little refrigerator in the truck, run on gasoline. It was turned off while the truck was en route, then put to work again when the truck stopped for the night, so we had ice when we arrived. We also had ice in a large thermos bottle that we carried with us. Roger drank cognac and Perrier water. I drank no alcohol at all at that time. The Belgians liked their comfort and arranged to have it, wherever they installed themselves. Jean, Roger's personal de confiance, was there to serve us. Not in white, as he had been for our high life at Dima, but in a khaki tenue that was impeccable and perfect for the occasion. Roger enjoyed the trip. In excellent health, he had no problem at all with the climate. But then this was not his first time in Africa. These days were a marvelous experience for me. I was thrilled as we plunged through tunnels of feathery green, kilometers in length, formed by the plantations of palms. Elsewhere we crossed broad savannas where swollen, denuded baobab trees stood like ancient elephants, gray sentinels of the flat lands. I marveled at the giant cones of ant habitats, laughed at traveling galaxies of chattering monkeys. Everything interested me. I never stopped asking questions, exclaiming, loving my beautiful land. From time to time, I noticed, we passed long lines of men, almost naked, working on the roads to the rhythm of a tam-tam. They were overseen by blacks in government uniforms who carried the chicot. At the sight of that cruel whip that I knew so well, my heart turned. Working beside these driven men were their wives and children, carrying baskets of stones and dirt. I was reminded of the prisoners outside our orphanage gates who shouted for French citizenship while their wailing women and children followed behind. I was frightened and repelled at this new spectacle of misery. Who were these people, I wondered. I wanted to know their stories. When we stopped to rest, I prepared a casual question about these people for Roger. Through him I had come to understand better the colonials' attitude toward the people of Africa. Roger was not an unkind man, but he accepted what he had been taught, that blacks, by their natures, were created to do the work for which the white man was not fit. Occasionally the blacks had to be reminded of this. It was the God-given order of things. On several occasions he and I had words that came perilously close to furious, total disagreement, although at that time I was not yet thinking in political terms of justice or rights, but only of pain. I saw these people as humans in whose pain my own early sufferings produced an answering echo. To keep peace with my love I had learned to dissemble a little. Now I said carefully, these files of workers we sometimes see by the roadside, they seem to be all of the same people. You are right, Roger smiled at the accuracy of my observation. It's the Mapend people, he went on, unwittingly, at my soft beginning. In 1933 the Mapends staged an uprising against the Belgians. We put them down, made prisoners of them. But my dear, this is 1940. I said. They were sentenced to forced labor for 20 to 30 years, Angel. That's the punishment for rebellion. Forced labor, for so long. Their work is useful, my love. They build our roads and railways. I was shaking with indignation, tears sprang to my eyes. Roger thought it was because of the chicots, which he too had noticed in action. To distract me he began to speak of the Mapend culture. He was knowledgeable about the different African peoples. This had been part of his training, and was one of the things that held me to him, that he could often tell me more about my own country than those who had been born there, Africa's own children. Roger told me that the Mapends were a proud and savage people whose warriors had killed the first white administrator. At important ceremonies, it was said, they had drunk from his skull. During their uprising they had fought for 3 years against the Belgians with their assegais and lances. Without possessing a single firearm they had resisted the whites for a long time. To me these men were entirely admirable. In spite of their fate, they still held their heads high. They had a kind of ancient dignity, with their Egyptian style of headpiece, a large band across the forehead stuck with pins of coppered gold. Their hair, rolled with palm oil into long curls, fell to their shoulders. The women wore skirts of raffia and their bodies, smeared with palm oil, shone in the sunlight. I found these people who were being treated like slaves a handsome, noble race. The evening of that conversation with Roger I was so upset that I made an excuse and went to bed without eating. Our trip went on, and I continued asking Roger all kinds of questions. I wanted to know this burning, living Congo. When we passed through a village where there was a Belgian administrator, Roger would pay him a courtesy call. During the time he was thus occupied, would go to the local prison, where there were administrators. I found there were bound to be prisons. It was behind their walls, I told myself, that I could learn the true history of my country. If the guards in charge at these prisons were surprised to receive a visit from an 18-year-old woman of mixed blood who asked many questions, they were generally good-natured and ready to reply. As I had suspected, most of the crimes for which the inmates were serving time were offenses against the white man's authority. Other charges the whites were not interested in, as the blacks were expected to take care of those problems among themselves. In the French Congo, the French government administered the affairs of the colony. In the Belgian Congo, the big companies that owned the land performed the administration on that land. It was like a feudal fiefdom. How do you keep your prisoners? I asked the guard at one stop. They're chained together, by twos, he replied simply, smiling. With what? Big chains on their ankles. And he showed me a set of these. Heavy, grinding iron pieces with vicious bolts that snapped shut. I saw a problem in taking these off and on. But what do they do, I asked, when they must take care of their private needs? Why, for that they go 2 by 2, the guard said. He continued, we never take the chains off. At night they sleep on a mat, beside each other. And to eat, we give them 1 lunch pail for 2. But these were human beings, so I told myself, these men of the Great Congo, this land that was said to be so fabulous. I pondered these things for hours. Roger, without a clue as to what was passing in my head, took these periods of reflection to be no more than idle female daydreams. To tell the truth, Roger's pat explanations for the things that tormented me had begun to sound so false in my ears that my original awe for his learning was beginning to be replaced by a suspicion that although he knew a lot of things, he did not care to perceive what was right before his own handsome nose and draw a humane conclusion from it. Given a problem involving the two races, he inevitably produced the colonialists' well-polished phrases about the well-being of the blacks being naturally in the hands of the whites, who knew what was best for all concerned. Each place we stopped I learned something new to distress me. One day in Coelho I saw dozens of children passing with heavy baskets on their heads. What are they carrying? I asked Roger. Palmetto nuts. The children have gathered them as their little contribution toward helping the Belgians back home. The palmetto tree produces a nut about the size of a grape, which, except for its dimensions and the fact that it does not have a husk, is very much like a coconut. It has a hard shell and the meat within gives a reddish oil from which the most refined margarines and beauty creams of Europe are made. Cocoa butter, renowned for healing scars, comes from this little nut. Africans eat it readily for it even tastes the same as the coconut. The great Belgian companies had set out thousands and thousands of hectares of these valuable nut trees. Except in Dahomey, which was closer to home and less expensive to exploit, the French did not work the land as did the Belgians. In the French Congo there were no comparable plantations. But the Belgians had only one colony, so they made the most of it. They cultivated the Congo as if it were their own backyard, fully. It gave them fabulous riches and they profited by it and enjoyed it. In the commercial harvesting, a man with a machete climbed, by means of a belt, to the top of the palmetto tree and chopped off the long stems bearing the clusters of nuts. Workers on the ground picked up these clusters and carried them on their backs to waiting trucks. Each time a cluster fell to the ground, some of the nuts broke off. The workers, hurrying from one tree to the next, did not pick up the scattered nuts. This was what the children were doing. While not worth gathering on a commercial scale, these nuts, when piled up, amounted to tons and tons. World War II had begun in 1939 and Belgium was now occupied by the Germans. Its people were indeed suffering, but I was not entirely convinced by Roger's explanation of why the children were working. The first chance that I could, I went off into a palm grove to talk to some of these children. "For whom are you gathering these nuts?" I asked one of them. "For the Father Superior of our mission." "How many kilos must you gather?" 15 kilos a week. "What happens to those who fail to bring the full amount?" I was talking to a boy of about 12. He shuddered. "Oh, madam, they are whipped so hard that the next week they don't make the same mistake." The church and the big companies had a snug arrangement in the colonies. The church gave its benediction to the enterprises of these companies, which in turn made occasional charitable gestures toward the church. Permitting mission children to gather nuts left over from the harvest was an easy form of charity. The companies were able to buy back these nuts for less than it would have cost to recover them by their own workers. And selling these nuts harvested by child labor brought the missions handsome sums. Our 2 months of travel drew to a close. When we returned home to Dima, I found that the archway that I wanted between our living room and our dining room had been constructed. I placed ferns there, and thought the effect was splendid. But I was unable to enjoy the house. I was physically exhausted by the trip, and deeply depressed by what I'd seen of the sufferings of my people. My feelings for Roger were now torn with doubts. More and more the differences between us seemed evident to me. Besides, I was 3 months pregnant and beset with morning sickness. My nerves were miserably on edge.
Congolese leaders and basketball fans are mourning the former NBA basketball star Dikembe Mutombo, who passed away earlier this week after a battle with cancer. Tributes have been pouring in from around the world for the towering Congolese-American superstar who has been celebrated for charitable activities for the underprivileged in his native country. CGTN's Chris Ochamringa has more now from Kinshasa.
A basketball training session in Kinshasa is held days after a cloud of grief covered the DRC following the death of former NBA star Dikembe Mutombo. The towering 7'2" center was born in Kinshasa in 1966, and it's in this city where he started playing basketball. His former colleagues have fond memories of him.
When we got elevated to the Premier Division, we played against Dikembe. His team was known as Onatra. They beat us. He later left for the U.S. and returned after many years to organize a basketball camp. Unfortunately, at that time, our government demanded very high taxes and discouraged him. But he loved his country very much. That's why he came back to organize tournaments. He supported many teams.
Dikembe Mutombo won 4 NBA Defensive Player of the Year awards during his 18-year career. He was known for wagging his finger after blocking shots. He was inducted in the Basketball Hall of Fame in 2015 and was a global ambassador for the NBA. His contemporaries in the DRC praised him for his persistence.
I'm very sad about Dikembe Mutombo's passing. He has left a great legacy, a lesson in perseverance. In life, we should know how to define our objectives and persevere despite the numerous challenges we face. One day, God will help us to overcome them.
The younger Congolese basketball players only heard about Dikembe Mutombo's achievements in the U.S., but they are nonetheless saddened by his death.
It was very sad news in the DRC and the basketball world as a whole because Dikembe was a great player. He did a lot, not only in the Congo, but in the NBA as well.
The 58-year-old former NBA star used his fame to carry out humanitarian work in his country. He built a large hospital in Kinshasa in 2017 and named it after his mother, Biamba Marie Mutombo. Although Dikembe Mutombo spent his entire professional career playing in the U.S., he kept coming back to the DRC to help young players like these to develop their talents. He also carried out charitable activities that have made his legacy go beyond the basketball court. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Again, the late, great Dikembe Mutombo, graduate of Georgetown, the Hoyas, didn't even know, native of the Congo, some of the very areas that we're talking about. Again, his hospital, it's on Boulevard Lumumba. We haven't even got that far in the book yet. He's ahead of us, kind of. The great Dikembe Mutombo, timing. Everyone in the world paying their respects to Dikembe Mutombo, as they should, and not just for what he did on the basketball court, but everything. And we're reading and studying about the Congo at the exact same time. Right and exact Katherine Massey Book Club. So we will resume Africa Unfolds. My life takes a turn. Fascinating portion of the again, we haven't even gotten to the portions of the book that are actually mentioned in the movie that this is all about, and I was even staggered this week. Soundtrack to a coup d'etat is about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, but he is not on the cover of the film, the movie poster. Who's on the cover? Andrée Blouin. I hadn't seen the movie poster in, I guess, a few weeks, and I looked back and said, dang, that's Miss Blouin right there. And they picked an image of her where, it's later in the book, we haven't got that far yet, but she is probably being followed by white killers. You'd have to watch the movie, and I think all that gets pointed out, but that's the image that they put of her, where she is being hunted by probably some of Roger's homies a few decades after all this. Literally hunted. Number to dial, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Drinking cognac and Perrier. That sounds like Jim Jones. Like, woo, you get down in the jungle in Guyana, the Congo, whatever. Get you a little cognac, Perrier, because they got the ice. You know, they probably had ice in Guyana, or at least Jim Jones had ice in Guyana. You get a little ice, and Perrier, and the Cavassier, squeeze a lemon. Whew. Refreshing. Can't do it. I do want to say really quick. Now, when I said things have not changed too much in terms of Miss Blouin told us that her mother was not educated, right? Emphasized that. She said it a few times, in fact. And I said that things haven't changed too much. I certainly do not mean to suggest that everybody in the Congo is dumb and all that. We heard from Professor Ilikia Mbolo in the documentary, BBC documentary that was at the beginning today. He's super educated, got a PhD, more education than myself. But on the whole, same would be true for the U.S. On the whole, probably even worse there because they got way more black people. On the whole, especially if we're going to have you as a slave even now. Apple Corporation, you better get down in that mine. We got these iPhones, you better get down in that mine, man. I don't care if you related to Lumumba, you better get down in there, man. We got cobalt, get that cobalt out of there. If that's what it's going to be on a wide scale basis, well then yeah, it's not going to be whole lots of, Lumumba's grandchildren and Greek nieces and nephews going to be enrolled at the university and publishing books about what happened to Uncle Lumumba. I don't think that's going to be, what's happening. I could be misinformed, but any hoodles. Let's see, the email, untiljustice@gmail.com. untiljustice@gmail.com. Write in, let us know if you have thoughts to share. The number 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Let us see. We'll get one email, and then we'll nab a few thoughts from other folks. I'll get to some of my observations as well. Let's see. Email number 1, Chapter 5. Madame Dupois unleashed an enormous wolf dog on me. I was terrified by its ferocious barking as it came after me. The boys of the house had run after the dog and drove him off. See the Cows Book Club, White Dog, Romaine Gary. That would be a great one. In fact, I was thinking you could get many times in the archives. Dr. Wazelchek, I think I'm saying her name correctly, and then Dr. Tyler Perry. She was a guest on the program way back in Dr. Perry was a guest on the program way back in 2015, and he said, or he told us, that was a part of what was the movie, or not the movie, but the fight, heavyweight boxing contest between George Foreman and Muhammad Ali. If my memory serves, I think that happened at the end of 1974, because that's right at the same time as the so-called zebra murders. I think crazily. But that fight happened in the Congo. At the time it was Zaire. Man, that has been on my mind the whole time we have been reading this book, even though that's a few years after everything that we're going to read here. But man, just keep that in the back of your mind, that fight, Rumble in the Jungle, Ali knocking out George Foreman to regain his title after, sitting out for Vietnam and everything, that happens in the Congo. 1974, I think. Might be 75, but I think it's into 74. I had to go back, double check the date. That comes to mind. Anyway, but the reason I brought that up is because George Foreman brought a German Shepherd with him to Zaire, Congo, and that upset the black people there. Ooh, man, you talk Ali Boumaye, Ali Boumaye, and they talked about that in the documentary When We Were Kings. And matter of fact, Dr. Perry talked with us about that in his report on the use of the canine to support the system of white supremacy, because it's global. They did that here, they did that in the Congo, all over South Africa. And he mentioned George Foreman. He sounded just like Andrée Blouin. No surprise there. The great George Foreman, he said, I didn't know white people use the dole to keep the black people, make them behave. Abusing. They chomp on the black people in the Congo. He said, I didn't know that. Dang. I wouldn't have brought my dog if I had known that because they look at the German Shepherd, which is the same dog from Romaine Gary's White Dog. They look at the German Shepherd, oh no, that's what they use to chomp on the. And you see the dog in the documentary When We Were Kings. 2. I was so truly in love with this man. Thus, a new life began for me, no longer the innocent proud. James Brown is in the documentary When We Were Kings. He went to the Congo to perform. Funky good time. Lord have mercy. Let's see. New life, proud, black. I was now to learn through love the degrading existence of the African concubine. That's the end of the chapter, too. Oof. I remember when I was deciding if I was going to read this book, because I had heard passages in the movie, soundtrack to a coup d'etat. I'd heard powerful passages, and oh my God, the white people are doing what? Oh my God, what? I started flipping through the early part of this book. Again, nothing that we've read, none of this is in the movie. They read the stuff that's end of the book, but we'll get later. I commenced to reading the early part of this book, and I saw that sentence right there. Through love, I was to learn the degrading existence of the African concubine. I think I stopped about right there. I was like, we good. Let's ride. We can read this one. What? What does that even mean? Through love? What? What? Love taught me what it means to be an African concubine. What? Do you love the concubine? Look here. When you go to Las Vegas, because many of us, we broke, you don't get frequent flyer miles like that, so you don't get to go to the continent. But man, I've been to Vegas. When you go to Vegas and you go to the Bunny Ranch, do you love the sex worker? You go to the red light district and what have you. Do you love the prostitute? That word love has got, man, dear Senator S.C. May Washington Williams, that word love has come up in some spectacular ways. Spectacular cowbell, too, on it. Ooh. Ooh. It's even kind of similar with the dad dynamic. And Chapter 5, Madame Dupuis. Wait a minute, I already read it. Chapter 6, there we go. Page 98. From then on, I was to be in the middle between Roger and the servants. You must be the mistress of the house now. He said I knew nothing about this. At 17, with the background I'd had. How old is this Roger dude? He's not 17. I don't know if he's quite 40, but I would think we want to say 30s. This dude, in fact, we might be able to go, like, these are real people. We might be able to go and get information like this Kasai company. There's all kinds of documentation on the company that he works for. They have reports, some of them written by people like him, the white people who worked for them, and I mean scientific data. How much rubber we extracted and control of the natives and rebellions that they had in this area, and black people wigged out and killed all the white people, counter-violence, all kinds of documents, just specific about this company, the Kasai company. Not to mention everything else. So we could probably find this dude, and we know exactly when Andrée Blouin was born, 1921, so then we could track and see how old he was. But I bet we could find this dude. They probably got records. But if I had to gander, I'd say probably 30s. Definitely 30s. I don't think 20s. If he's been doing this and he's been around the continent and all that, I'd say 30s. Maybe a little older. Maybe she'll tell us, in fact. We'll keep reading. Maybe she'll tell us exactly. Let's see. Oh, wait a minute. She said, how old is this Roger dude? What was the age difference between these two lovebirds? 2. The Kasai Company of Belgium, like the Interfina of France, was an enormous enterprise, imported and exported whatever was profitable in Africa. Africa. The giant Walmart for white people. You just don't have to pay anything at the checkout. That's it, man. That's it. You go through, that is a metaphor. But you go to Africa, oh my God. Man, get the biggest thing you can think of, man. Get about 50,000 container trucks, because we packing up all the Negros. We packing up all the rubber. We packing up all the mangoes. We packing up all the palm trees. Like, you name it, we taking it. Don't get me started on the uranium, the cobalt, the coltan. We taking it all. We taking it all. Leroy, we taking him too. We taking him too. Wait a minute. You can't take Leroy. We taking him too. We taking him too. Taking it all. And then call your names. After they took everything, talk about how dumb and backwards you all are. Like, dang, you took everything. You took Leroy. Well, you're so dumb and ignorant, you didn't know how to use the palm trees or Leroy. So that's why we took it all. And you. Because you're so dumb. And they say that because you're so dumb and ignorant, we had to take you to civilize you and teach you something because you're so dumb and ignorant. We couldn't leave you there with all those treasures to be dumb and ignorant. Like, dang, at least we didn't go and bomb and toxify the whole planet being dumb and ignorant. Man. 3, the civilizing process. African labor learned to work hard all month to pay for the sugar. See, the first thing they mention, sugar. Matches, cloth, beer. Sobriety would be best. Got to get some liquor in you and get some of them cancer sticks on you. Yeah, man, you don't need no liberation. Get a drink of that thing. Yeah, man, get some of that. Pass the Vassier, man. They said we pile all these addictive, carcinogenic poisons on you that you would not have wanted if you were not working for the white man and woman. Very similar to what occurred. Haven't we heard all this before? That's in Half Has Never Been Told that we got to have Liquor Day for Christmas. We got to. He even said that specifically to make sure that these niggers don't get no rebellious ideas. Get a swig of this rum. See, it's got nigger woman on it. Take 2 sips of that. Your equilibrium is off. And hey, we can tell a few jokes and just keep them shackles on. Everybody's having a grand old time. That's how we run the plantation. Remember Shawshank Redemption? They even sneak cigarettes into prison, man. Tobacco, liquor, reefer sometimes. Let's see. 4, Roger was not an unkind man. Ooh, got that ugly double negative. Roger was not an unkind man. We'll forgive her because she's not a native English speaker, but still. He accepted what he had been taught, that blacks, by their nature, were created to do work for the white man. Not unkind. Oh, we got the grammar squad. Interesting use of the double negative, saying he's a racist white supremacist seems sufficient. Wait, whoa. You don't call the love of my life no racist white supremacist? Whoa. That's exactly the sort of nonsense that they say, like 2025, 2030. That's what they say. You know, white people, they unconscious, see? You know. How can you be a white person and not everything that you're taught? How would you think Leroy is anything other than a crackhead Negro, looter? How could you think anything other than that? They've just been taught. They've been brainwashed. They're victims, really. That's the same nonsense they say. Now, I don't even know what you blame it on then because they didn't have no Netflix or YouTube. Say, well, you know, Roger just been sitting in front of the YouTube all his life. Huh? Really? What now? Let's see. Number 5. In 1933, the Moupendes, whatever you think that is, staged an uprising against the Belgians. We put them down. Woo! See how you say that? We put them down. That's like talking about a rabid dog. We put them down. End of story. Now, did he sound like that? Well, that's just the way Roger been taught about things. You know, like, what? We put them down. White dog, see? That's what happens to the black dog. We put them down. Made prisoners of them. Sound like Madiba. But my dear, this is 1940, I said. They were sentenced to forced labor for 20 to 30 years. Angel? That's the punishment for rebellion. Wait a minute. It's a whole lot of niggers being mistreated here in the Congo and throughout the known universe. They didn't rebel. Some of these folks got beat just because, you know, you told them to pick 500 pounds of rubber and they got 495.5 pounds. You say, oh, we got to get the Chicot, beat you to death. It's a whole lot of people, like, even that doesn't add up. Like, whoa. Now, if all of these niggers were shiftless and mouthy, like Gus T, Lumumba, if that were the case, then okay, maybe. But that's not the case. You all go around and round up a lot of black children. They didn't even do nothing. Like, what are you talking about? They were rebellious. We put them down. That's you do for life. You're going to be a slave now for life. Now get in that mine and pick that cobalt, coltan, all the rest of it. Got computers to make, man. He said, in other words, they are lucky we did not hang and castrate them. Facts, which we might do anyway. Facts. They talk about Lumumba. Put his body in acid. We're going to get to that. Put his body in acid. Saved his teeth. And it's just what we've been taught, you know. Hey, you know, you got to have discipline, you know. He was knowledgeable about the different African peoples. This had been part of his training. Do you see? I said so many times, like, oh man, we're gonna have to move something on the book club because I think this is top 10. Like, woo! This had been part of his training and was one of the things that held me to him, that he could often tell me more about my own country than those who had been born there. Ooh-wee. Ooh-wee. Hootin', as she said, Mama didn't have a centima of education. So, you know, tree don't fall, or the fruit don't fall far from the tree. But ooh-wee. I thought niggers everywhere. We were intelligent and smart. I thought Whitey don't know nothing about Africa. Whitey don't know nothing about black people. No, contraire, mon frere. I know about your tribe better than you do. Facts. She said that. I didn't know nothing about that. She said she was out on the Congo. We're like, what is that? What? Who? What? What's going? What? They're there. These are the different tribes, the pygmies. We've sold about 15,000 of them. Like, woo, man. I see now. Now I'm remembering this book was not intended for us. You don't have no generations of black people. They read this book and it informs their understanding of racism. That's not the case. Even Gus, where did you hear about this book? I learned about this book from that film that was done by a white man in Belgium, where they quoted from it liberally. White man tell you more about your family than you know. Your whole family know about who you are. That's what we got. A white man wearing white tell you more about who you are, your country, your mother, your whole continent. And you don't know nothing. Unfortunately, ain't a whole lot about that changed in 100 years either. Our listener wrote, white people are more informed than non-white people regarding racism, white supremacy, what it is, how it works. And it's not even close, and it looks like it's gotten no better in 100 years. Who's the co-author? It's a white woman too. That's the only reason we even got this book to read, because it's in English. Blouin is not a native English speaker. The Chicot. She said they didn't even teach her French well. New book in the top 10. 7. Roger told me that the Mompides, there's it. I think I said it right. I think I got it. Were proud. Savage people. We heard that word a lot this week too. Proud. I'm black at James Brown, whose warriors had killed the first white administrator. At important ceremonies, it was said they had drunk from his skull. Come on. Sounds like Dahmer again. I am suspicious of this story about the skull. Sounds like something. Come on. That's what I said. That's what I said. Yeah, they do have lots of rebellions. They have some of these reports in the New York Times and everything, but that is exactly what I said. That sounds like something that white people would do. Not that, it's certainly possible. Maybe that is the, and in fact, hey, maybe they saw somebody do this. But whatever. Maybe they did do it. Who knows? I did have my suspicions when I heard this story, and at minimum, I did think, man, that's Jeff Dahmer, right? During the uprising, they fought for 3 years against the Belgians with their assegais and lances without possessing a single firearm, and they resisted the whites for a long time. Assegai is a type of spear, not much of a match, ultimately for the great equalizer. Facts. He inevitably, Roger, produced the colonialists' well-polished phrases about the well-being of the blacks being naturally in the hands of whites who knew what was best for all concerned. I think she is having, based on what I've learned from the cows, broadcast a common feeling of those victims in tragic arrangements. Could the person I'm sleeping with be a racist white supremacist? Facts. And it would be the same. Is my dad a racist? Is my mom a racist? So you got a white parent, this white man I'm sleeping with, this white woman I'm sleeping with, are they racist? Whoa. They're well-meaning, not unkind. They might have some privilege, and certainly they've been trained, and they're ignorant and unaware and unconscious, and they got a teaspoon of bias. But I mean, racist. It's hard. It's bad now. It would be real hard in this sort of setup. Like, I even got to pretend our little tragic arrangement here, like, especially given what she's seen with her mom. Like, oh my God. Oh, let's see. The children have gathered them. This is number 10. The children have gathered them as their little contribution toward helping the Belgians back home. For the Father Superior of our mission, what happens to those who fail to bring the full amount? Oh, madam, they are whipped so hard that the next week they don't make the same mistake. This is when she's trying to, now again, she's ignorant. She doesn't know about all this. She's like, what's going on? What? They got these folks in the chain gang in the prison, and what's going on here? So she starts asking questions. All of this. Wow. What I said before, individuals classified as white, they make a distinction about their subjects, non-white people, victims of racism. If you have a white parent, that is a distinction that individuals classified as white, they note. That is a part of how they run the system. It's no coincidence. First Negro president, they say. White parent. That's right next to the Congo, too, Kenya. But a white parent for Obizi. That's not a coincidence. We've read this before, even Dear Senator. We've read this before. There is no way in the world this would have happened where she gets to go out and ask questions. One of the most lethal things in the world. Sometimes people get to dying just based on wrong question was asked, or maybe, depending on perspective, the right question was asked. You're not supposed to ask questions. We've heard Dr. Welsing told us about it. Running around asking it. You don't ask no questions. Go over there and sit down before I get my cut. If this was a legit black boy, 2 black parents, this ain't happening. This ain't happening. We ain't coming in. They took and showed her the. This ain't happening. If this was a legit non-white person with 2 non-white parents, this ain't happening. But kind of pale. White parent. Now, side piece of a white man. Oh, okay. We'll show you if you think. What questions? How many questions you got? We'll knock them all over. Let's make it an interview. You got a podcast? Woof. One of the madam's boys, there is no way in the universe they can just take a casual stroll and go ask all these questions and find out if they were indeed ignorant about all this. Ain't no way in the world. Particularly, you're 17, you're almost an adult. Come on. Ain't that much black male privilege in the world at this time where they're chopping off wrists and hands and everything else where, oh yes, we'll just come and give you the matter of fact. You're ignorant about all this. Let me get my caught and learn you. go and ask questions. Incredible. Incredible. Let's see. Oh, and our listener wrote in, is it nothing has changed, which I keep saying over and over again. See the book, Cobalt Red, How the Blood of the Congo Powers Our Lives. That was on the best nonfiction book list for 2023. I mentioned it on the program previously, I think in connection to Jim Jones, saying the same thing. Nothing has changed. I had even put money down, like big boy money. I bet they are raping all kinds of niggers down in the mine. How would you even know? Who even cares? I just want my iPhone. Let's see. We did not even get far enough for the rest of it. We'll have to come back and pick up. Let's see. Yes, we'll have to come back and pick up for the rest of it. Pause there. Let's see. Email again, untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. Other folks who dialed in, the number 605-313-5164, the code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Let's see. Lauren should be with us. If you have commentary, I'll nab other folks as well.
Yes, sir. Evening, everyone. The first thing I noticed, Madame Dupuy, this is the large white woman she was working for, about 60 years old. She said she was a fanatic about her clothes and her appearance. She was always highly rouged. Her eyebrows painted long and black and her hair crimped as for a ball. I thought that was interesting. She's trying to add color to her face and then actually crimping her hair. Maybe I'm thinking about it too much, but a crimp, I don't know. Is she trying to look more like a non-white person? I don't know. So then when she tells her it's going to be the 5 francs for the dress, you know, they have some words, and the white lady says, I'll have you thrown in prison. She said this was too much. Undone, I shouted that she was a thief of my time, and a painted old witch to boot. And I think that's exactly what she was trying to do, steal her time and energy. I thought of a vampire. Let's see. She said, I never believed that to be unclean or unkempt was a sign of virtue or humility, even if it is said that dirt is the water of the poor. I have never heard any such thing, and I wouldn't want to be dirty either. She said when she meets Roger on the boat, she says, first off, I'm going to ask this as a question. I didn't notice it, but I don't think she called Roger a white man. Like, I don't think she actually said he was white. You just were supposed to deduce it because I think she said he was somehow related to the royal family or something like that. And she says, Roger's presence brought me a turmoil that I had never before experienced. Everything I saw, heard, and felt was intensified for me. Never had I felt life more keenly. In the evening in my cabin, I found mysterious tears rolling down my cheeks. I could not understand the strange sensations that were taking possession of me. This not uncommon experience, for which every woman waits with hope and joy, was for me unfathomable. Perhaps I was happy, I thought. I was troubled, tormented, finally obsessed. That whole little segment right there, it didn't sound like happiness being described at all. And then when she described Roger, she says, I abandoned myself in the arms of my first love, this handsome, bronzed piece of the race that had so often hurt me. And see, that's not calling him a white man either. She actually called him bronzed. So I thought that was interesting. Let's see. All right, you pointed that one out already. She said, in the succeeding days, I was better able to appreciate Roger's splendid home. Dima was a company town built on the edge of the river for the Europeans. The view was pleasant, and the air and climate were the best in the region. The African workers were less favored, some distance away amidst the swamps and mosquitoes. And just no matter where we are on the planet, white people's residences and the areas that they reside in are almost always more desirable than the places that they put people classified as black. And so she was describing how Roger would go out to have dinner or something like that with other people. And she said, however, when the wives of other officials in the company were entertaining, the handsome bachelor director was bound to appear alone, and inevitably he was paired off with someone's daughter, sister, niece, or guest. Roger said that he hated this and on several occasions even rebelled and made a scene. But underneath, both he and I understood that this was the reality of our Africa, and we had to accept this with a certain resignation. That just, I don't know if I would have noticed that if the name of the book was not My Country Africa, because she called it Our Africa. Let me see. Oh, she made Roger had a servant, and she said his trousers, jacket, and shirt were impeccable, just out of the laundry, crackling fresh. And when he served us our aperitifs or waited on us at the table, he wore white gloves. And she also said, but to me, to be served in a livery of white with white gloves was the summit. Well, she likes the white clothes, but I think that's left over from her being at the church and them making such a big deal of the white clothes, the white dresses and whatnot. Let's see. Oh, once they took the trip and, they're on the boat and she's asking a lot of questions. She said, elsewhere, we crossed broad savannas where swollen, denuded baobab trees stood like ancient elephants, gray sentinels of the flat lands. And it made me think of that children's story, The Little Prince. It's written by a French author, but it's racist. If anyone's ever read it, I guess you'll know what I'm talking about. It's pretty short, easy to locate. Let's see. Though I had come to understand better the colonials' attitude towards the people of Africa, Roger was not an unkind man, it's already been talked about, but he accepted what he had been taught, that blacks by their natures were created to do the work for which the white man was not fit. I highlighted that not an unkind man, and I was like, well, is that supposed to mean he's a kind man? She didn't say that. And I was wondering if that's what she meant. I don't really know, but she said what she said. It was just confusing. Let me see. Y'all talked about the Mukende people. And 20 or 30 years, that was the sentence. But, yeah, you already commented. It's a lot of other people being forced to work, and, they're being treated in a very similar manner, and they didn't rebel. And also I noted that she said without possessing a single firearm, they had resisted the whites for a long time. I think they said it was like 3 years or something like that. That is, wow, surprising. The nut. The children who were picking up the palmetto nuts, and she asked Roger what they were carrying, and he says palmetto nuts. The children have gathered them as their little contribution towards helping the Belgians back home. And she goes and asks them, and she said, for whom are you gathering these nuts? And they said, for the Father Superior of our mission. She says, how many kilos must you gather? 15 kilos a week. What happens when you don't have those nuts? Said she was talking to a boy of about 12. He shuddered. Oh, madame, they are whipped so hard that the next week they don't make the same mistake. And also, the church and the big companies had a snug arrangement in the colonies. The church gave its benediction to the enterprises of these companies, which in turn made occasional charitable gestures toward the church. I mean, they're all, I don't know, the church basically, I think that's all I have for right now. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Much obliged, Shamika Harris. FYI, 15 kilograms, 15 kilos is a smidge over 33 pounds for anyone. So, that is a lot of nuts, especially if you're a child, if you're, 12, whatever, 10, and you got a quota, or you are going to be beat, boy, you're going to get chakotted like 33 pounds. 33 pounds. I wonder how much time, like, that is like a substantial load. Like, oof, I wonder how much time you got to get 33 pounds. Like, man, you got to be rolling. And that's a lot you got to wag. And, man. Any hoodles. Let's see. Important, I don't think she calls him a white man. Think she says colonialists, but maybe as close as she gets. But I don't think she says Roger. You're a white dude. Let's see. I thought it was significant to Madame Dupuy doing the rouge. She's got to get a little color on that paleness. Theft of her time. I thought that was important too, and the fact that she noted this. This was even one as well where I thought black male privilege. If this had been a black male, he would have probably been killed. That would have been that. It wouldn't have been, I'm going to call the police, like, he'd have been killed. And she has it in quotes, boy, when she's talking to, or she's talking about this event, because she has it in quotes. These could have been like 40-year-old black males, 50-year-old black male, like, who knows? I mean, hey, the only person who qualifies, man, woman, father, mother, white people. So I appreciate that she did put boy in quotes, but yeah, I was thinking like, these like 50-year-old black dudes are being called, boy, get this sassy nigger woman out of here. And they released the dog on her. Let's see. She talks about the contrast, the so-called comfort and security of being in some sort of tragic arrangement with a white man as opposed to her life. Man, the grass is always greener. Like, no. I cannot imagine. Like, nope. You got bad situations and bad situations. Like, I do not see that as being any better at all. And we got two illustrations right here. To be Josephine and have a white man steal your child and take them off to boarding school, prison. That's what we're going to go with for now. No, I do not think that that is any better, in quotes, than having a white woman steal your time, rob you, threaten to call the police on you, and sick wolves on you. 6 in one hand, half dozen in the other. Let's see. Incidentally, I did make time to research the Congo River in between. I would be scared out of my mind right now if they put me in, like, oh my God, like, man, that thing is massive. Like, oh my God. Like I mentioned, it's the deepest river in the world. Not even close. The width of that river, oh my God. You can't even get in the water. Like they showed people, like today, right now, they showed the currents alone. You can't even get in the water. Like, man, when she talked about people, it's like, wow, that is intense. That is exactly the way it looks right now. Like, wow, that is intimidating. I do not want to get too close to the bank. I might fall in. You got crocodiles, and the white people have toxified all this because they dump all the mining waste, so you can't even drink. Like, whoa, you don't want to drink that. And then, like I said, you got crocodiles, and I think, oh my God, like, man, no, thank you. I'm gonna say, if we got to be on the boat, let me stay. Ooh, I don't want to go out and sightsee. I don't want to go look. I might fall. Like, it is really intimidating, especially certain points of it. Let's see. She saw one of her old friends from the orphanage, prison, boarding school. She was going to marry a man of mixed blood. I guess she was also mixed blood because everybody at the orphanage were like, dang, make sure you don't end up with a black person. Black, get back. Let's see. And they put the so-called mixed race person, he's a captain. He gets to be in charge of one of the boats on the river. Let's see. I have to see what Balongo, see if I can figure out what that means. Let's see. I've never heard that dirt is the water of the poor. I've never heard that, nor have I ever heard there being any pride about being unkempt. I've heard cleanliness is godliness and all the rest of it, even people that don't have a lot of money, even sometimes bragging about, well, we don't have nothing, but at least what we're going to have is going to be clean. Like, I've heard that many, many, many times. Let's see. Oh, she didn't say Roger was white. He was an aristocrat of birth. Incidentally, we heard about the aristocrat. She said he was an aristocrat related to the Belgian royal family. So is that like King Leopold? That's what, that's the royal family. That's what it would, especially this time. So King Leopold, like, ew. Like, all of that racism and ew. I guess it doesn't have to be said. Like, if I've said all that, this is like a super duper white man. Yikes. We have to get the age on this dude so we can see exactly what the differential is between these two. Roger Serruys is his name, Serruys. I bet they probably have like books or whatever on this dude so we can find out exactly date of birth, all that. We can, nail it down to the day. Let's see. Even the clothing, the whiteness, I'm so glad that she was detailed about the food and the white clothing. Lauren pointed that out. The image that I used, they have whole pieces of artwork about the savagery that happened during this time period. The white wardrobe of the white people is even in the artwork. And they mentioned that in the audio segment that I started with today to dramatize the slaughter of King Leopold II, royal family, Roger's uncle or whatever, probably, that to dramatize, they're hacking off people's hands, fingers. Look at this. Oh, savage children. They would get the black people and dress them in white for the contrast. But if you look at all the other times, you do not see Negroes wearing white in the Congo. Some of the earlier photos that I published from this period, that they took at the time period, published online, you see the white people wearing all white. The black people are either nude, semi-nude. If they do have clothing on, it's not white. They might have a white undergarment or something like that on, but white people, everything. White socks, white hat, white laces, white shirt, white pants, white belt, white cane, white handkerchief, with a white glove. She talked about it. That's for a reason. Yes, African is hot, but no, that's for a reason. Because they got some of the black people, they got a uniform on. It's not white. Emphasis. They did double entendre, you might call it. White. She said the Catholic Church, and it just goes on and on and on. The nuns, we got to wear all white. In contrast to you nude, savage barbarians. Now bring me some more children to rape. Let's see. She talks about the so-called privilege that she has in comparison to the other niggers. She asks him, is he ashamed of being with her? That's another one. Like, what in the world? What in the world? Have you watched that scene with your mother left outside when your white dad and his white wife stole you and took you to the boarding school? You watched all of that. That cannot just be totally erased from the brain computer. That didn't happen. And same thing. Is he going to do? That would have to be somewhere in the brain computer. Like, whoa. Like, wait a minute. Man, I'm up here being mouthy. He could leave me just like my dad left my mom. Stole me. Maybe that's too traumatic. I'm being too traumatic. Sorry. She used that R word, romance. Let's see. We get trained. I don't know what. The fairy tales. I bet we're part of this too because they were at the orphanage. I bet. I want everything that was a part of it. The so-called fairy, and even her mom is encouraging. Like, I told you, you dummy. You supposed to be doing this anyway. You big dummy. I told you. Get you a good white man. Let's see. She said, I waited obediently for him at the cabin. That just gave. That's what the dog does, man. I sit by the door quietly and wait for master to go. Like, that's how they train. Snoop Dogg, right? That's how they trained us, man. Let's see. Concubine, end of chapter. She goes around asking all these questions. That's what Fuller says. That is the beginning of knowledge, man. Ask questions and ask questions and ask questions. White people beat us and don't allow us to ask questions. I cannot say enough. If she did not have a white parent and a powerful white sex partner, she would not have been allowed to go around and ask all these questions, especially to other white people. Like, dude, what? Even probably to a lot of black people, this would not have been allowed. Let's see. Even in the Congo, the African workers were less favored. That's what I mean. That's how white people run the system. Oh, you have a white parent? You can run the riverboat. You got two black people. You better not ask no question. You better be lucky we let you keep your genitals. That's how they run the plantation all over the world. We heard this in The Black Man in Brazilian soccer. Things were very different if you had a white parent, even in Brazil. And that's the same time period that we're reading. Let's see. The food. When they go and she hooks up with Roger, they go get to check out their new quarters that's hooked up for the white people that are part of the Kasai company. Vegetable garden with lettuce and radishes and cabbages. Like, they are balling. And you can go get whatever. They send in, import whatever, artichokes and olives and all the rest of it. Get whatever you want. Upset all the white people. Even that I thought was, I'm a powerful white man and I can do what I want. I don't even have to follow, you all can be upset about how I'm practicing racism. I got my little side piece non-white thing and, whatever to y'all. We can walk around and hold hands and thumb your nose in it. I'm related to the king. Go out with my good-looking side piece if I want to. And we often will confuse that for this is a well-meaning, not unkind white man. No, it's just a racist white supremacist who has a thing for dark oak. Remember that? Monsters Ball? We miss you, Halle Berry. Served in white. Practical love. And she said, for me, it was an apprenticeship in living, and for Roger, it was a practical love affair. Like, what? What? A practical... His side piece, I want a little bit while I'm here, and I might have 3, 4, 10, 12 of you dispersed throughout the continent. Who knows? This isn't my first time around the block. She already told us that. And you saw all this. I can't keep saying that enough. I know this is not me, and that's traumatic and all that. She went to the orphanage. I got all that. But you watched your dad steal you from your mom. I would have to be thinking, this joker is going to do the same thing my dad did to my mom. I'm going to be the one jumping up and down. He going to steal my child away or whatever, dissing me, rolling off with this white woman, and I can do the same thing. I can blame it on the white one, but either way, same thing is going to happen to me. That's what I'd be thinking. Maybe I have to block that out. Too traumatic. Hope for the best. Don't lie to yourself. Fuller said it. Hey, man, don't lie to yourself. Worst thing you can do. Don't lie to yourself. So she goes, asks questions, blah, 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 and then Roger is drinking cognac and Perrier. I love it. Let's see, the moped people revolts. They probably have documentation of that too. I'll look next week because they had revolts way before then and subsequently, but I bet they have documentation of this specific revolt in the 1930s. And the punishment even. I bet they got court records and all that too. There's so much detail on all this. That's another. I love the nonfiction because you can just go and look a lot of times and, wow, that's crazy. Let's get more details on what happened with all of this. Let's see. The religion of white supremacy. God said this is how it's supposed to be. And even that language, Lauren had talked about that term father. Look at that. For whom are you gathering the nuts? For the Father Superior of our mission. I'm your daddy. Forget Josephine and I'm the daddy. I'm the mind. It's Papa L'Etat. German state. That's father. White father. And we ended. Her nerves were miserably on edge. How could they not be? That's what white people intend. And this is literally sleeping with the enemy. Generations of it, in fact. Ugh. The victimization. But like I said, they don't have good options here, you know. Go get your hands chopped off. Might get raped anyway, so. Ugh, terrible options all the way. If you have commentary, make a note. We will get to audio segment 2, My Country, Africa, Andrée Blouin, Katherine, Massey Book Club.
One evening Roger went to dinner at the home of friends in the company. I, of course, could not go with him. About 11 o'clock he returned, and came to me in the room where I was embroidering a sheet for my baby's layette. I have some friends with me, he said. I looked at him. What am I supposed to do, hide? The old pain welled up inside me. I'm not something to be hidden, I said stubbornly. I refuse. I don't want you to feel bad, he said, but I don't want you to make problems, either. Then don't bring them in the house. But he did. I was beside myself with feelings. I didn't know what to do. I went into the kitchen which the servants had cleaned and left. On a sideboard was an unopened bottle of Perrier. It would serve. I picked it up and hurled it as hard as I could at the floor in the far corner. The sound of the soda water bottle exploding on the cement was like a shot. Of course Roger thought that I had killed myself. He had never concealed the location of his gun, which I could have used at any time. He came running into the kitchen, his face drained with fear. We stood there, both of us trembling violently. When he saw that I was not dead, he was so relieved that he did not reproach me. He knew that I was in a terrible state of nerves with my pregnancy. Don't be upset, he said, putting his arms around me. Go to bed quietly, I'll soon be there. His friends had one drink and left. Not long after that incident I told Roger I wanted to return to Brazzaville. I wanted to be with my mother while I waited for my child. Roger was supposed to go on another trip. I could not go with him, that was out of the question. Roger said, "Why do you want to leave? If you don't feel like making the trip with me, you can stay here in the house. The servants will do everything. You can just rest, and sew when you feel like it." But I insisted that I wanted to be with my mother. And when he saw how sick I was, there in Dima, he thought it might be better for my health if I were with her. He saw how demoralized and sad I was. And so it was agreed. I was to go back to Brazzaville for the next 5 months. And then just before I was to have the baby, he would come to get me. It was promised. Already we were preparing a room for the baby in our home. It would be rose-colored if it were a daughter, but blue if it were a son. With Roger I was making the conventional plans with which Europeans express their happiness as they wait for a child. For me it was the consecration of my dreams to have a child with a good father. On May 5, 1940, Roger accompanied me from Dima to the river boat landing at Bainingville for my trip down the river. The boat on which I was to travel was owned by the Kasai company of which Roger was the director. But the captain informed us that because I was not white he could not give me a cabin. He invoked the law. Roger was furious. His face was livid as he argued with the man, but the captain stood firm. Finally, it was Roger who backed down. He did not insist. Forced to do something for me, I was so frail and ill, with my baggage and my sewing machine, he found a tiny room that belonged to a Congolese mechanic. It was cramped and filthy, but at least it was not the open deck. He paid the mechanic to let me have the cabin, and arranged to have a clean hammock hung up for me there. Our feelings were exacerbated by the humiliation of this event. Amid tears and kisses, Roger and I parted. 3 miserable weeks later I arrived in Brazzaville and fell into my mother's arms. Only here, it seemed, was I safe from the pain of prejudice against my race. Chapter 7. My Rita and my father. I told my mother at once that I was pregnant. I said shyly, "Maman, I am going to have a baby." She was thrilled. A baby. Oh, my daughter. A baby. At last I will be happy. Josephine had always feared, the way I shut myself off from men, that I would never have a child, which meant that she would never have a grandchild. The man with whom I had conceived this child made absolutely no difference at all to her. The thing was, she would have a marvelous baby to love and spoil. Immediately my mother told me to take off my clothes. Everything. She wanted to see my whole body, to have it entirely free, in the air. Tenderly, she stroked it, pressing my stomach, where the child was now alive. To fulfill an important African ritual, she hastened to the river for a handful of fine white sand. This she let fall like a gentle rain over my belly, which protruded just a little. Passively I stood there, accepting my mother's loving ministrations, feeling connected through them with my ancestors. Sand is a symbol of the earth on which the child is coming to live. Because the child's nature is delicate, the sand is fine. It is white because of the purity that should surround the child. Rice is thrown at a wedding, representing a wish for prosperity. A child is offered not prosperity, but the earth, as it is. Early each morning after that, while I was still sleeping, my mother would come to me and slip off my nightgown. She would look at my stomach and touch it, as a doctor would, to see the progress of the child. Through her hand she gave the child strength and health and love. She wanted to transmit all that she had that was good to the child. She spoke to the child. Not to me, but to the child. There was a direct connection between the grandmother and the grandchild, the child in the body of her own child. "When you come, don't hurt your mother," she admonished the child. And she also spoke to me to give me courage for childbirth. If I had been disagreeable with her the previous day, she would say nothing to me, but she would express her forgiveness as she talked to the child. "I understand how your mother feels," she would say. Thus, even before it was born, my child became an intermediary between my mother and me, another link between us. As my stomach grew big, my mother was so proud of it. She knew I would have a girl because my bulge came to a point. She used to say, "This is my rival, this is a little girl who will come." In my later months she would command, "Lift your dress, I want to see the child move." And she would watch the child moving in my belly with a kind of childish delight. "Look, look. It's moving." As if it were a marvelous toy. My father's reaction was another matter indeed. When he warned me about the risks of leaving his house, it had been just such a danger that he had foreseen. At that time I had thought myself impervious to this common trap for a young woman on her own. I was concerned only with making my living and was far too proud to involve myself with a man for whom I had no feelings. Now here I was, caught in this utterly banal situation. I knew he would be enormously displeased. Still, I had to tell him. My mother agreed. In fact, she insisted on it. Knowing what his reaction would be, I was unable to write him a letter as I could not find the right words to put down on paper. Since my mother was so happy with my pregnancy, I thought it would be best for her to be my emissary. Perhaps her enthusiasm would soften the news, win him to a forgiveness and understanding for me. My mother left for Bangui. She returned a few weeks later with my father's answer, which cut me cruelly. "Go back to Brazzaville," he had said to her, "and tell Andrée I don't ever want to see her again. She can expect nothing from me now." Why should these words, half expected, hurt me so? Nothing, really, had changed. I was already used to living without him, without his help or his love. But the irony of the situation, that I was only continuing the pattern that he had carelessly begun by creating my life, did not escape me. In his colonialist mind with its watertight compartments for various pieces of truths, this probably never occurred to him. But on another level, as my quarrel with him not long before his death was to reveal, he knew. My mother had with her 200 francs. "Your father gave me this money," she said. "Put it aside for the day when you have your child. Then you can buy some nice baby clothes, in memory of your father." What a strange, almost maternal love my mother showed for this man who had been so harsh. Nothing, it seemed, could shake her belief in his fundamental goodness. As the days crept by, I was increasingly depressed. To earn my living, I again sewed. Both my white lady customers and my black neighbors had things to say about how my vacation had given me a big stomach but no visible husband. Furiously I ignored them, working again until late at night by the glimmer of my lantern. Soon after my return to Brazzaville, I left the tiny house in which I had lived. Roger sent me money for a 2-room apartment, which I found at the edge of Poto in a building occupied by the Salvation Army. During those difficult months, the directors, Major and Mrs. Madison, were very kind to me. They saw that I was so young and so sad. They helped me to bear my pregnancy with their small attentions. From time to time they would give me some cookies or chocolates. They invited me to their services, not to try to convert me, but to distract me. "I'm not very enthusiastic about religion," I told them. "That's all right, my daughter," Mrs. Madison would say. "Just come with us as our guest for the afternoon. You will see people, it will do you good." So I would go with them, and in fact, it made me feel better. They had a little car that they used in their work. Sometimes in the evening they would say, "Come, my little Andrée, let's take a drive around town." For me to ride in a car in Brazzaville was something very special. But particularly it was important to me as a sign of friendship. Major and Mrs. Madison spoke Lingala perfectly. They had classes in the courtyard of our building for girls, teaching them to read and write in their own language. They also taught the girls religious songs in Lingala. This impressed me very much. I still know the Psalms by heart in Latin because I was one of the solo singers in the cathedral on Sundays for the orphanage, but I never knew the meaning of what I sang. The Salvation Army girls also learned sewing and embroidery. To welcome my baby they began to knit booties and other things. I was very touched by this show of affection and support. The rebel of the orphanage continued to rebel, now that she was outside, against the odious racism she found practiced around her. The movies were for whites only. One evening 4 or 5 of us girls from the orphanage went to the cinema Athanakis, the only movie house in town. At the ticket office we were refused tickets. We pushed our money at the cashier and went in anyhow. The police were called, we were instructed to leave, resisted, and were thrown out. But the following Saturday night we were back. I remember very well the slaps I got, with my big stomach, in front of the cinema Athanakis, and I knew Madame Athanakis too. I sometimes worked for her. But it was not for myself that I made such scenes, it was for what I had in my stomach, for my unborn child. I felt it had to be done, we had to begin somewhere. Eventually, although it frightened the Europeans and they hated what it symbolized, we won. We were admitted to the theater. In spite of the cost and personal humiliation to us, we had to make our presence felt. We had to make the whites admit that we could no longer be ignored. The shopkeepers' attitudes galled us. Most of them were Portuguese, but they got their point of view from the French administration. When we entered a shop and asked for an article in French, they would answer in Lingala or Kikongo to humiliate us. It was a way of saying that although we had French citizenship, we had no real right to use the French language. When we persisted in speaking French, they would make such remarks as, "This malblanchie, badly bleached woman, is trying to act as though she is an evolved person." This was a challenge that I frequently rose to. It was unthinkable, for example, for an African to eat butter. Therefore, my heart beating hard, would go into a shop and deliberately ask for it. "I would like 250 grams of butter, please." "Butter?" The shopkeeper would burst out laughing. "And how are you going to eat your butter?" Stubbornly I would continue to ask for butter, even though I sometimes hadn't a sou in my purse. I would hold my ground and insist. Finally, worn down, the shopkeeper would bring out the butter, cut it and weigh it for me. Then I would coolly say, "I don't want it after all," and turn and leave. For us that was a victory. We had refused intimidation. Even if we had not yet the means of a white, we had made it known that the old rules no longer held. Because I have so often made derogatory remarks about the Portuguese shopkeepers, I would like to explain the special position that they held in the colonialist system, and at Brazzaville. Most of the Portuguese had been poor in their own country and they arrived in Africa as sailors. They were illiterate, with no pretensions of any kind, the proletariat. On Africa's warm shores they saw they could have a better life than in Portugal. They took women of the country as their wives and lived with them in their villages, working to build up small shops and enterprises in the town. These poor people, who had failed elsewhere, who never asked themselves the why of things, found themselves under the French administration. They fell in with the system as it was, adopting all its prejudice. Always very Catholic, the Portuguese continued to have relations with the church and priests. As shopkeepers it seemed appropriate, occasionally, to make gifts to the mission, as a way of consolidating their position with the priests who in turn were very close with the administration. Gifts of foodstuffs worked in their favor. They gave the orphanage things like camel meal from Fort Lamy that was so tough that even when it was cooked for 2 days it was like the sole of your shoe. And sacks of beans. But the beans were full of little black worms that rose to the top when the beans were cooked. The pot would have a scum of 3 or 4 centimeters of worms. Really it was disgusting to see. The cook would skim off scoop after scoop, but she could never get them all. Most of the time there were still worms in the beans when they were served. We were so hungry we couldn't take the time to separate them, so we ate them as they were. The French, who came to the Congo for other reasons, looked down on the Portuguese as second-rate because of their backgrounds and because they lived openly with their black wives. As whites, the Portuguese occupied a position between the French and the blacks, toward whom they acted with a disdain learned from the French. There was one remarkable difference about the Portuguese: they usually recognized their children. There were a number of half-Portuguese girls at the orphanage whose fathers had deposited them there because it was considered the thing to do. However, when the families went away on vacation, they took their daughters with them. It was beautiful to see them leave together, and when these girls returned, we who did not have vacations or fathers heaped questions on them about what they had seen and where they had been. One of these girls was Marie, the one who told me that for her birthday she ate a whole can of sardines. I still remember her story with astonishment. At the time I was appalled by the enormity of her lie. To catch her I had asked her how she did it. She said, "I take the sardine by the tail, and I put it in my mouth." Her brazenness was beyond me. Here was a girl who had a father and still sinned shamelessly. My working conditions took a turn for the better one day when I met on the street a friend of my father's, Hubert Baum. Papa Baum, as I had learned to call him in Bangui, worked for the Compagnie Générale Transportation Africaine, CGTA, which operated a fleet of passenger boats on the Congo River. He had known me as a baby before I left for the orphanage, and as a young woman when I returned. He was an old bachelor, a very kind man, who took pleasure in doing little services for people. While I was at the orphanage, he did something that we girls never forgot. One special day the nuns took us for a walk along the banks of the Congo, and Papa Baum invited us all aboard one of the CGTA boats for a refreshing drink of grenadine. Grenadine. That sweet, reddish-orange drink made from the juice of pomegranates. 2 by 2 we approached the punch bowl, which had ice in it, and we were served. We didn't even know what it was, but we were ecstatic. Monsieur Baum often had such kind ideas. "Good heavens, my child," he said when he saw me. "How are you?" He meant, of course, my pregnancy, which was now quite apparent. I was so tired and heavy. I told him that if his company needed to have the sheets of the first-class cabins mended, I would like to do the work. Papa Baum agreed that this was a good idea. He proposed it to the head of the company, Monsieur Delorme. I had already done a lot of sewing for Madame Delorme, so this gave me a good recommendation. It was a great relief to me when the CGTA gave me this work and I no longer had to go out, as before. Papa Baum even had the heavy bundles of sheets delivered to me by the company truck, and collected when they were ready. I could thus plan my days without having to endure the caprices and changes of mind of the European ladies. More than once I felt that they did those things because it amused them to control not only my work and my time but my very hunger. For when I needed the work to eat, what, but accept, could I do? If mending piles of torn sheets was dull, at least it was well paid and steady. I gave it my best effort, for I have found that I get more pleasure from a task, however lowly, if I do it with love. Occasionally I still sewed for some of my European women, making dresses and embroidering their lingerie. I also began to have a new kind of clientele, a number of evolved young black women who were on their way up and who were concerned with their appearance. Some of them were the rebelles de nuit, who wanted beautiful clothes for the evenings. For them I made European-style dresses, but also African-style dresses with camisole tops. Sewing for them was quite different from sewing for a white woman for whom I had to walk back and forth across the city several times. An African woman would bring the fabric to my house, seat herself, and wait all day, trying it on when necessary, until it was finished. Our great competition was the African tailor with his sewing machine run by the feet, which was much swifter than ours. These tailors would install their sewing tables in front of the Portuguese shops where the women bought their fabrics. The woman had only to take down from a hook the length of fabric that she wanted, and these men were on the spot, ready to cut and sew it immediately. By the time she finished her marketing, her pain was done. She could fold it up, put it on top of her head, and leave. But for dresses that required a little more care, the women came to us. I did a lot of the finishing work by hand. We did not have patterns in those days. Styles were not as precise as those we have today. Still, the dresses were pretty and flattering. Each week I waited for a letter from Roger. It was my only joy. His communications were mundane, nothing of our original passion was reflected in their ordinary news of his work and his days. Still, it was a bit of him that came to me, a presence in my solitude. I still loved the tall, bronze man I had met on the deck of the Belongo. In spite of his assurances that he continued to care for me, I could not help but remember the invitations, the other women to whom he was introduced, women with whom he could be seen. I tried to put away an insistent premonition. 2 months before I was to give birth, the thing I had most feared happened. One day, on opening the newspaper Le Courrier d'Afrique, I saw a headline announcing Roger's engagement to the daughter of the governor of Lusambo, a province of Kasai. Because I had dreaded it, and known that it was eventually to be my fate, did not necessarily make the shock any less terrible when it came. In fact, I had tried during this separation to turn my heart away from Roger by reminding myself of how little he cared for the things that mattered to me most, how totally incompatible we were in the matter of our land's greatest single drama, race. It did no good. Instead, I found myself remembering our passionate hours together on our enchanted island, the Belongo, and our good moments in Dima or Kuelu. Now I was wild with grief. I could not bear what I had so long feared. Desperately I thought of the child now stirring in me, this child conceived in loving abandon. Did Roger still esteem me enough? Had he enough of a sense of responsibility to recognize this child? Remembering my own terrible loss because of my father's commitment to Henriette, I wrote Roger asking if he would be married before or after the birth of our child. This letter, which went on for page after feverish page, was an outpouring of everything in a betrayed woman's heart, condemning him, forgiving him, ranging from the cruelties of the scorn to still ardent protests of love. I reminded him of all I had suffered because my father had not recognized me, a story that I had poured out to him in Dima amid the delicious tears of lovers sharing their deepest feelings. Now I pled with him to give our baby his name. In his answer Roger promised that he would do so. "It is my child," he wrote. "These questions are not necessary, my dear. Of course I will recognize it. That goes without saying." He added, "I will never let you down." I was reassured somewhat, but not entirely. My premonitions remained. A month before my child was born, Roger was married. My child was not to have his name. The pattern of my life was repeating itself. My father had not legitimized me because of a Belgian woman. Now it was a Belgian man who would not legitimize my own child. Josephine had no understanding of the grief and pain I suffered when Roger married. A stranger to her, he did not count at all. Her only thought was for my child, which she was sure would be beautiful like her own daughter. Nothing else in the world existed for her. Roger wrote that he wished me to have the baby in Leopoldville. He would come for the delivery, he said. He was moving to Leopoldville himself, and it would be easier for him to visit me. I was glad not to have my baby in Brazzaville, where it would be at the hands of the same nuns who ran the orphanage. Their remarks about how I was carrying a child of sin infuriated me. I did not want to entrust to them the life of this treasure I was awaiting. Perhaps, also, I cherished a faint hope that someday, in spite of everything, Roger would claim his child. I knew stories of men who had relented years later. At any rate, it would be well to give my child the nationality of its father. My hopes for my child's recognition were never to be realized, but my delivery in the Belgian Congo was to be prophetic of a later phase of my life. One day, there, I was to be deeply involved in the labor pangs and bloody birth of that country in its independence. Roger was married a month before my child was born, but a month before that he came to see me. Yes, and to make love with me, passionately, although I was very big with child. In spite of everything he still cared for me. I believe he adores me still. We had 2 whole days together. During that time he said not one word about his forthcoming marriage. His only concern seemed to be for the birth of our child. "When the time comes, and you go to the clinic, send word to me here," he said, putting an address into my hand. The maternity clinic to which I was admitted was for Africans only. I paid extra in order to have a bed. Women who could not pay for a bed were delivered on a mat on the ground. By modern standards it was a terrible place. No care was provided for the mother either before or after the delivery, except if there were complications. Food was not provided, cooking was done by the relatives who accompanied the mother. Dozens of little wood fires burned on the ground just outside the dormitories. The smoke was everywhere, it was like a village. Each woman took care of her own bloody linens, washing them at the faucets in the passageways, so that the gutters through the rooms ran with bloody water. Still, to be in a clinic at all was a privilege and an improvement over the usual conditions for an African mother and child. My mother was there with me. She cooked for me, and at night she spread her straw mat to sleep beside my bed. But she slept little, rising often to look at me and touch my stomach, to see if the child moved. She was a tender mother. Although I was occasionally impatient with her ideas, she was always there, attentive and warm. I sent word to Roger at the address he had given me, but he did not come. A friend of his, one of his colleagues in the Kasai company, came instead. He was a tall man with a distinguished face, and he looked very out of place in the bedlam of this African maternity clinic. His manner was one of great courtesy. "Roger is away," he said, and his voice was kind. "He's at Luxembourg." "I know," I said. And I cried and cried. He tried to console me. "It's a marriage of honor, you know," he said. "It was arranged by his family. Don't be upset, my child." He gave me money from Roger that I didn't want to accept, but I really had no choice. "Let me know when the baby is born," he insisted. "I will come back again." On December 16, 1940, 19 years to the day after my own birth, I was delivered of a fat, healthy girl. She was the image of her father with hair of pale gold. At her first cry, I said to the nun who was acting as midwife, "Quick, give me the child. Give the child to me." The umbilical cord had not yet been cut, my child was still a part of my body when the startled nun, at my insistence, put her into my arms. I pressed her to me. "My daughter," I swore to her aloud, my voice shaking with emotion, "you will not have the life I have had. No one, nothing on this earth can take you from me. You will be happy, my daughter, I swear it." Happy. My mother raised her arms and thanked heaven for the child. She was so proud to be a grandmother that she burst into song and sang the rest of the day. As for me, I was a mother. A mother. This child had been born of my flesh. I would be both mother and father to her. She was mine. In squeezing her fragile little body, I felt a kind of reckless pride that could brave all. I sent my mother off to inform Roger's distinguished friend of the birth. Josephine left, singing at the top of her lungs. That very evening he came. He thought my baby beautiful and took a photo of her at once to send to Roger. The kindness of this man made a great impression on me. In spite of the tumult of the place, with its terrible odors of blood and maternal milk, his courtesy was perfect. As he came toward me, he gave a dignified nod to each of the women in my dormitory. I thought, here is a man who has respect for his own person, because he shows respect for all of us here, in spite of the conditions in which he finds us. He was not afraid to come, 3 times, to see me, and to comfort me.
Katherine Massey Book Club. Do we have another well-meaning white man? We have another well-meaning white man. We'll pick up there next week, Chapter 7, My Rita and My Father. I did feel a little bit bad, not like way bad, but a little bit bad, because I did say before, this is not my situation. It's a little bit different, the psychology of this is your life, your lived experience, trauma from childhood might be too painful to accept. And she said what I feared most. You cannot hold people's fears against them. So certainly she didn't forget, but oh, the terror of it all. The terror of it all. Tragic arrangements, isn't that what he say? That's what I said before, like, man, you sick the dog on me because I'm mouthy seamstress, or I'm a concubine and you run off and steal my 6 in one hand, half dozen. Katherine Massey Book Club. Number again, 605-313-5164. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The email untiljustice@gmail.com. Let's see. I will read our email and such. I'll do phone line first. Let's see. We'll see if Lauren, she had other commentary to share, and then we'll see if other listeners have thoughts as well on this portion of the text. Lauren, anything stand out noteworthy in the second portion of the reading?
Yes, I did have a couple of highlights. Let me see. Oh, from the last session, I was surprised. You remember they were talking about the nuts that came from the palmetto tree, and she said cocoa butter came from those nuts. I thought cocoa butter came from cocoa beans, not the little fruit from palm trees. But anyway, let me see. Okay, hold on. Okay. All right. So she's going back to Brazzaville, and she said, already we were preparing a room for the baby in our home. Her and Roger, they were talking about what color they were going to paint the room and stuff, whether it was a boy or a girl, but she said in our home. That struck me. Number one, it's not ours, and number two, it's not a home for her, maybe for Roger. Let me see. 3 miserable weeks later, I arrived in Brazzaville and fell into my mother's arms. Only here, it seemed, was I safe from the pain of prejudice against my race. That didn't make sense to me at all, because, like, right before she left, it was because that white woman ran her off. She's running down the street. She falls. It's dirty and or muddy, and a dog comes and bites her dress, tears it up. I don't understand what she means that she's safe from the pain of prejudice against her race. Let me see. Oh, so when she tells her mom she's pregnant, her mom goes and gets the sand. And she said sand is a symbol of the earth on which the child is coming to live, because the child's nature is delicate and sand is fine. It is white because of the purity that should surround the child. I noted that, because white and purity. When the father finds out she's pregnant, he sends Josephine back to Brazzaville. Says, go back to Brazzaville and tell Andrée I don't want to see her again. She can expect nothing from me now. I was thinking, he already said that. He was like, don't count on me, or something along those lines. That's not exactly what he said. And so I just, whatever, that was no different. Let me see. Oh, and Josephine, she was talking about Josephine and the way Josephine thought of her white father. She said nothing, it seemed, could shake her belief in his fundamental goodness. But then she turned around and did the same thing, because when Roger comes to see her before she has the baby, let me see how she said it. She said, Roger was married a month before my child was born, but a month before that he came to see me. Yes, and to make love passionately, although I was very big with child. In spite of everything, he still cared for me. I believe he adores me still. We had 2 whole days together. During that time, he said not one word about his forthcoming marriage. His only concern seemed to be for the birth of our child. All right, so he still adores her. Got it. The hospital she went to, well, you can call it a hospital. She called it a maternity clinic, and it seemed terrible, the conditions. Well, she said, everyone didn't get a bed. The women who couldn't pay for a bed were delivered on a mat on the ground, which might not be so terrible if they're used to being on a mat on the ground. She said, by modern standards, it was a terrible place. No care was provided for the mother, either before or after the delivery. What are you going there for if they don't give the mother care? I don't understand that at all. She said food wasn't provided. Cooking was done by the relatives who accompanied the mother. I guess that's okay. But then she said still to be in a clinic at all was a privilege and an improvement over the usual conditions for an African mother and child. And I just don't, you're with other black people, or people classified as black, the way y'all did it before white people got there, why would going to this not hospital be better than the way it had been done for thousands of years? I didn't get that part. And also when she had the baby and the nun said, "Quick, give me the child, give the child to me," like it was exclamation marks. I was nervous about that because it just seemed like Roger kept wanting her to go somewhere and have the baby, and I thought they might take the baby when it was born. I don't know. Maybe I was just worried because she was taken from her mother, but she was 3 years old. And I guess that's all I have for right now. Oh, and I looked up Valongo. It said it was a Mandinka word meaning moving water or river. And it was also a plant. It said a perennial non-climbing tree, small tree or shrub. It described it, but I could not find a picture of the plant or the tree. And that's all I have. Thanks for allowing me to speak.
Fascinating. Much obliged. The Balongo. Have to ponder, because, Jim Jones, he had all those names for the ship. Kofi, that's not it. Not Kofi. Cujo, that was it. He had all those names for his ships. It's going, get you down, Guyana. And yeah, it's similar in my mind anyway. They got the cognac. It's real similar. Much obliged, Lauren. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Before I get the other emails, other folks who dialed in, if you have commentary, don't wait till last minute if you have thoughts on the books. Let's see. Book, plural or singular. Continuing the first email. Page 107, it was cramped and filthy, but at least it was not the open deck. He paid the mechanic to let me have the cabin and arranged to have a clean hammock hung up for me there. I love my hammock. What a guy that Roger is. And see, that was our listener's commentary, but that's so important because often it doesn't take a whole lot. And I mean cows, listeners, non-white people in total throughout the universe. It does not take white people doing very much. Sometimes they don't have to do anything. We had a non-white guest on the program some years back, and he said he gave a presentation on racism, and the white people did nothing, literally nothing. They didn't say anything. They didn't applaud. They didn't give a thumbs up. They didn't wink, sign a check, raise, nothing. And he was so proud of their lack of effort that somehow constituted that they did do something. I said, well, wait a minute. They didn't hire any black people. They didn't get you a new trash can, a new plunger, gold teeth, nothing. They did absolutely nothing. But it's, wow, these white people, they didn't call me a Negro, see? They didn't fire me either, see? Much less if you're just kind. You get them an extra biscuit, a piece of cornbread. You don't use the chakot on them for that day. Oh, this is the best white person ever. The one that's raping the teenager? You mean? We got to find out how old this Roger dude is, because let's find out this dude is like 50 or something. Like, whoa. Let's see. Chapter 7, 1. Through her hand, she gave the child strength and health and love. She wanted to transmit all that she had that was good to the child. She spoke to the child, not to me, but to the child. Thus, even before it was born, my child became an intermediary between my mother and me, another link between us. What a lovely scene. Reminds me much has been taken from us due to racism, white supremacy. Facts. And in fact, when I was first hearing this, I was thinking when she said that her mom, Josephine, wasn't talking to her, but the child, I was thinking that she was about to be like, see, they're leaving me out of it and doesn't even give me a, and that's not what it was at all. She was emphasizing this to show that her mom was establishing a direct connection with her grandchild, with her grandchild already, without, talking to you, whatever. I'm talking directly to my grandchild in the womb. Need that now, man. How many children 2025 are missing that right now? Don't have nobody talking to them. Facts. Especially if they're classified as black. Facts. Much less maternity care. Facts. But yeah, I thought that was, it's because you could be reading to your child and all of that. Just, wow. Beautiful scene. Beautiful scene. Lost my place too. Father's answer, which cut me cruelly, go back to Brazzaville. He said to her, and tell Andrea I don't ever want to see her again. She can expect nothing from me now. I was with Lauren like, didn't you already say that? I got to live there for 2 months. I gained 10 pounds. And then your white wife was like, you killed the dog, accused me of poisoning the dog. Man, I didn't know dogs were going to be that big a feature in this text. Like, woo. I think that even continues when we get to the Lumumba part, but we have to see. But you accused me of killing the dog? I said, you're not getting nothing from me. Get on out of here. Beat it. And then I leave. That's exactly what I feared. Why'd you let me leave as a team, man? You could have told me, well, you're not getting nothing from me. Don't think you can. When did you give me anything exactly? When I was at the so-called orphanage? Get out of here. What a loser white dude. Racist. Let's see. He said, listener wrote in, nothing, it seemed, could shake my mom of her belief in the fundamental goodness of this white man. But she has a never mind. Tragic arrangements in the global system of racism, white supremacy are just sad. CD Cow's broadcast, Renethia Tate, she was just with us this year. We were talking about Sade Robinson. That's another sad illustration of dating a white man, so-called. Renethia Tate, pieces of a puzzle. 3, Salvation Army directors, Major and Mrs. Madison, were kind to me. Very kind. Come and little Miss Andrea, let's take a drive around town. For me to ride in a car in Brazzaville was something very special, but particularly it was important to me as a sign of friendship. What'd I just say? He wrote, so little is required of suspected racists to obtain our appreciation. Did y'all see the counter-racist theorist of our times, Chris Rock? He had that segment where he said, man, you go to Brazil and you see black people, they have never seen a car before. And they're like, what is that? Oh, it's got a wheel. Oh, my God. That's the way, like, what? And then the reason you got that car, they already told you, I got to have tires for my car. Get in there and get that rubber. Firestone. That's a little bit further north on the continent, but same thing. Let's see. 4, the odious racism she found practiced around her. I'm not sure about describing racism as practice is unusual in most texts discussing racism, white supremacy. Agreed. 5, the French who came to the Congo for other reasons looked down on the Portuguese as second-rate, living openly with their black right. If there's a reason to despise someone, bang, that would be it. Who lives openly with a nigger woman? This is another one where, man, Andrée Blouin and the non-white people there are kept very ignorant. Because if she's talking about the Portuguese at this time, why does Pele speak Portuguese? Oh, they didn't pick up nothing from the French. If these are white people that came from Brazil or their ilk, they didn't pick up nothing from the French. We colonized and stomped on Negroes all over the world. We know how to treat Negroes. Shacking up with some of the white people. I shack up Thomas Jefferson and Sally. Sometimes Jeffrey Dahmer. I like to shack up with my nigger woman or nigger male or nigger child. Often, most times, nigger child. 6. The pattern of my life was repeating itself. My father had not legitimized me because of a Belgian woman, white. See right there, she doesn't say white. She says white frequently in the book. She even says non-white. That's another one that's irregular. And this was so long ago. A lot of people don't say non-white now, and she says it in the book. Non-white. But man, that Belgian, what it's white woman. Nah, it was a Belgian man, white, who could not legitimize my own child in spite of everything Roger still cared for me. Oh, God. I believe he still adores me. Tragic arrangements are sad. See, that's why that right there, you lied to yourself, you're through booking. She said, I've seen this before. I know how this story, painfully, I know how this all ends. But I don't want to think about it. You can't lie to yourself. Even if you're going to do this, you go into this, you know, I'm going to end up like my mom. That might be me out jumping up and down on the river. If we have a child, we do this, maybe I can see if we don't get pregnant. We do it that way. But if I get pregnant, oh yeah, child in the orphanage, you know, all the rest of it, that's what this is going to be. I am the side. You don't lie to yourself. That's the worst thing you can do. Start lying to yourself. You know, Jeff Dahmer, he loved me. Actually, I can't even use Jeff Dahmer because they were not rogue. He was like drugging people and tricking people and stuff. That can't retract. That's not a good illustration at all. At all. At all. I had to think of one where they were doing that old line and all the rest. Well, yeah, he does love me or she loves it. Nah, that's not what this is. That's not what this is. Let's see. 7. I thought, here's a man who has respect for his own person because he shows respect for us all here, in spite of the conditions in which he finds us. He was not kind or showing respect. He was just doing his job as tasked by Roger. I know Andrea refers to him as Roger's colleague or friend. I suspect Roger was more likely his boss. Now that is a great point. That is a great point because there's not that many white people here. This guy, they could all work for the Kasai company. So yeah, this is your duty. This is your task for the day, is to go and do this. It's not like Roger is my homie and we went out to the bachelorette party and I got cigars to sell. Like, that's not what this is at all. At all. I'm here as a part of my colonial duties as a white man, doing a favor for my fellow race soldier. That's what this is. Again, we get so confused by just a white man. He didn't call me Negro. Wow. This is a good fight. Like, wow. Man, Roger got some good white dudes. No. If they were really good white dudes, they wouldn't be here at all. Working for the Kasai. Roger is like nephew of King Leopold II, we think. Aristocrat, she said, royal family. So, I mean, this is probably a really powerful white man. Even he tells other white people, I say it, you do it. I say jump, you say how high, man. That type of thing. That's why I can go shack up with my black nigger woman in public and all the other whites, they just get attitude. Let's see. And that is as far as we got for this week. We'll pick up for the rest of it on next week. Let's see. Let me get in a few of my notes and we will call it a session 4. I think this book is amazing. But now, even that's something to think on. This book, I think it was Lauren told us last week, this book, the paperback is not coming out till next year. We're so futuristic. We're ahead. Paperback coming out in 2025. But if you go to get a copy now via Amazon, like the hardback, I think she says like $100. Wow. Say we read expensive books. Now, who is this book for? This book is in the University of Washington library. I saw that when I first started. Who is reading this book at the University of Washington? A school where they don't have very many black people. Who do you think she even wrote this book for? Published in English. Her Congolese brothers and sisters? In the mines? One to think on as we proceed. And particularly, man, practice that. I would agree. I don't really hear very many people had that in their book. Fuller, Dr. Welsing, who puts that in a book? Practice racism? control non-white people? Who writes like that? I'm like, what? Wow, amazing. And she has a white parent and it's that dress. Wow, amazing. Top 10. And again, now, where did you hear about this? Oh, the white filmmaker in Belgium. Let's see. Scroll back up here, beginning of the second portion. Her mom, I do think it's constructive. Like, this is at least the second time where her mom has kind of snatched all of her clothes out. Like, let me examine you. Get a look at it and see what's going on. She, the pregnancy, that's important. And then when she's a child, that she's still developing. I mean, if you go to the doctor, that's what they would do, right? Take off your clothes and, let's see, make sure everything is checking out. Look at your skin, no discoloration. Everything is healthy and developing proper. That's what they, would do in a very medical, non-sexually abusive manner, right? It didn't. I mean, she's not even getting adequate food. She's eating bricks and dirt, basically getting parasites. So, right on for mommy. Now, certainly we don't want to encourage getting a concubine. But I mean, hey, doing the best she can, struggling. She certainly didn't know parenting class, right? Let's see. Safe from the pain of prejudice. I'd underline that one too. Like, what? How would you be able to say that anywhere in the known universe, much less in the Congo? They got the dogs. And they got like, what? Where would that place be? Like, let's just go there right now. If there is such a place, like, we need to go there and hide. I don't think such a place exists. Let's see. The sand being pure. Now, I realize people have different rituals and all that, but man, especially after we had all this about the white clothes and white gloves and white this and white that, and even the ritual for the child, we got to get pure white sand. Like, wow. Wow. Just wow. Just wow. And when that child gets here, they didn't say that child had a mop of slick, pale. That child had a head of pale gold. Of course. Let's see. The colonialist mind. That term, and I realize the, time and all that, but Frantz Fanon would use that term a lot. The colonialist mind and the colonialist. White terrorism, white supremacy. That's what we're talking about. Colonialist. Because they do the same thing. They say colonialism has been dead for a half century or more. And we still got the minds with niggers. Let's see. The majors, these kindly white people, everything is the religion of white supremacy. Like, even when they were going to leave the church, get out of the orphanage, it was still, well, you still got to pray. Religion of white supremacy. We got white Jesus and all. It is so important. This is what you were put here for by the Creator, is to serve white people. Like, the role of it, I will at least say that during this era, the role of the missionaries and the religion of white supremacy cannot be understated. Oh my God, that is your sole purpose for being in the universe. The Creator wants you to serve white people, behave and be obedient to white people. That is so astronomically powerful in molding how you think and view the world and people classified as white. Dr. Welsing talked about that repeatedly, as others have. The movies were for white people. We've heard that over and over and over and over. And if you do get to go to the theater, you got to go up to the Negro section in the balcony type of a thing. And then if you do get to go, what they going to be showing? Gone with the Wind, even in Kinshasa. That's my old Kentucky home, that type of thing, even in Kinshasa. Let's see. Portuguese shopkeepers, we got that. She doesn't know about Brazil, I guess. They get the worms in the food. I said, man, Didn't we just read this? Jim Jones, didn't they say in Guyana, we got the food, children, we got the food, and they got maggots in the food. And they slaved and worked us so hard we can't. We're too lazy to pick the food, the maggots out of the food. We just eat around them. Then we just hear that people got food that's so bad I can't even get the vermin out of my rice, and then bang, get it again. Talk about food insecurity. That's in Shawshank Redemption too. You got the Andy had the maggots in the rice. Let's see. The whole birthing scene, just Jesus. That's another one, painfully. Not much has changed. That's why Dikembe built a hospital. Not much has changed. And again, a lot of this is deliberate because we don't really want you to have robust health if you're going to be in that mind. That's not everybody, but that's what we got in store for a whole lot of you dark people here. You're going to be in that minds. But it was really pitting. As a certified prenatal yoga instructor, just wow. All that. And even on the floor, like, oh man, like they don't even... Man, they even try to give more options in that, so you don't have to be on the ground and all the rest of it. So you could be up and just, man, you're lucky to get a bed. Lucky to get a bed. Man. And again, now, not a whole lot. Serena almost died in childbirth. She's not Congolese. Not that much changed. We'll leave it there. We haven't even got to now. We're not reading this book for this portion here. We're reading this for what happens in part 2 of the book. But wow, it has been amazing. I have Practice Racism is in the book. More to come. I'm so excited. Andrée Blouin, My Country, Africa. Patrice Lumumba is waiting for us later on in the text. We'll be here tomorrow, Neutralizing Workplace Racism, same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And this weekend, compensatory call-in. Can't say enough. You can go both. There's so much. If you're ignorant about the Congo, there's so much to study. They have whole books written just about the Rumble in the Jungle, Muhammad Ali fight. They have whole books written just about Patrice Lumumba. They have whole books written just about King Leopold. They have whole books about what has transpired since then. Apple, you got an iPhone for sure. You shouldn't be ignorant about the Congo. What's going on right now? And everything in between. The Kasai Mining Company, even the specific things that we're hearing, they have whole books about that. They have whole books about the Métis, the mixed race children of the Belgian Congo. They have whole books just about that. If it has sparked any of your curiosity, hey, ask questions and get to researching. Reading, writing, researching, more important than watching Netflix, YouTube, TV. Sobriety, man, for all the sugar and rum references that we've been hearing, man, sobriety would be best. A lot of black people died to get white people rum. Oh, I forgot. She mentioned the rum last week that white people enjoyed that had the picture of a negress on it. St. James rum. I posted images. This liquor, they have some of the most plantational imagery in marketing their product. This rum still exists, one, but two, you can go back and look over the years. They have images of just tons of half-naked and nude niggers slaving to make sugarcane to get this rum. They got another one with half-nude black people that Negress on the bottle. They got another one, looks like they got a little dark child who's got this big, large bottle of dark rum in the jungle. And it's so planted. In fact, it says, I think it says the rum. Let me pull the photo up real quick. It says, God, that is so plantation. It's a plantation. It literally, and it's a plantation with a man in white. That's why I need to see it, because I forgot. I thought he was wearing white. Wearing white. It's a few other people with clothes on, but they don't get to wear white. If you get clothes at all, you can get non-white clothes for your non-white body. Only white people wear white. I said they the OGs of the white party. That's not Diddy. All aspects of it. Even the baby oil. Got the cocoa butter, right? But it's rum de plantations de St. James. And it's rum, R-H-U-M, but rum of the plantations of St. James. They said that was popular. Past the Cavassier. They said that was popular. Especially you get the bottle with the nigger woman on it. Woo! Brown sugar indeed. Creator, we ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. No name calling, no gossiping, no throwaway offspring, no name calling black people. We had some more of that this week too. Uppity, half-bleached white person wannabe. That's what they called her. No name calling black people. Cow signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. Yeah. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my condition. Mm-hmm. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.